Chapter 41 Preparation to Enter a Dimensional Crack 3. Still intrigued by the topic of necromancers, Michael continued reading about them. He learned more about their limitations, their strengths, and how they related to him. Michael also realized a significant issue with his current knowledge of the supernaturals in this world. While the Supers Association Forum had expanded his understanding considerably over the past 2 days, more than he had in the previous 18 years, his knowledge was scattered and unorganized. Without a structured foundation, there were gaps everywhere, making him prone to mixing things up. This realization only strengthened his resolve to enter an academy, if possible. For example, Michael had initially thought that the inability to place an undead inside the netherworld would cripple necromancers, considering it a serious issue. However, he learned that it was more nuanced. The problem wasn't as dire as he'd imagined. Necromancers with connections didn't suffer the same limitations. They could place most of their undead, or even all of them, inside the netherworld, depending on their capabilities. This meant that only weaker necromancers were forced to divide their forces between the land of origin and the netherworld. The truly powerful ones likely didn't face this restriction. Dividing their forces was a choice to them. It wasn't the necromancer's true limitation, but rather a challenge for the less capable. After scraping together what he could about the ritual for placing undead into the netherworld, Michael couldn't help but agree with what he'd read. The ritual involved using materials imbued with negative energies and a strong connection to the land of the dead. As long as one wasn't overly unlucky, they could successfully summon and dismiss their undead after performing the ritual. The effect of the ritual was comparable to the advanced mastery of undead summoning. With this newfound understanding, the problem didn't seem as difficult anymore. Michael's heart relaxed slightly, but it was also filled with a renewed determination to rank up so he could enter an academy. At least now, he no longer felt burdened about evolving his undead. Their evolution was part of his strength. The stronger they were, the stronger he became. Fueled by the same intense drive he'd felt when trying to place Lucky in the netherworld the day before, Michael decided to go all out. 3 months. If he spent every day fighting monsters, especially those above his level, to maximize his experience points with the multiplier he'd get, he didn't believe it would be impossible to get close to his goal. If the real world couldn't offer him enough monsters, he'd head into the land of origin and smash that damn gargoyle to dust. For power, even the normally cautious Michael couldn't help but feel a trace of madness. Time was too short. He had to go all out. The land of origin was incredibly important to awakeners because it offered resources and opportunities that the real world could never match. Although Michael hadn't yet reached the point where real-world resources were insufficient and didn't fully share the sentiment, he still understood it. For example, the ruins he had found himself in upon his initial arrival were a significant opportunity for awakeners, one that could not exist in the real world. This made sense when considering the difference in histories. The civilization history of the land of origin was hundreds, if not thousands, of years old, while Aurora, the real world, barely had 300 years of history since the start of the Dark Age. When you really thought about it, it was easy to see why the land of origin was so cherished. Michael suspected that if awakeners couldn't die in the real world, they would likely care little for it and fully embrace their other identity in the land of origin. It was also the land of origin that explained why, contrary to his initial thoughts, necromancers weren't unsettled by the need to divide their forces between both worlds. While not stated directly, Michael noticed that most awakeners preferred to develop themselves in the land of origin, and for necromancers, undead summoning was primarily a convenience. It was annoying not to have it at their disposal, but it wasn't as crippling. Of course, this depended heavily on the type of necromancer. Yes, there were actually different types of necromancers, just as there were various types of beast tamers, their most comparable class. Michael could only find 3 types of necromancers that were commonly discussed: commander necromancers, horde necromancers, and specialist necromancers. Commander necromancers focus on commanding a smaller group of high-tier undead, valuing the strength and potential of each individual. This group prioritizes quality over quantity. For example, at rank 1, the highest number of undead they would contract would not exceed 10, with each undead being at least 3 stars, common rank. As they advance to rank 2, the same approach applies. but with rare ranked monsters. Michael suspected that the truly capable commander necromancers, if not all, could summon all their undead from the netherworld, thanks to their low numbers and steady strength increase. Horde necromancers, on the other hand, are a group specialized in overwhelming enemies with sheer numbers, typical bullies. They focus on commanding vast swarms of undead, using all their contract slots as soon as possible, with the quality of their undead only improving as their rank increases. This was a group Michael wanted to show he was part of, except he wasn't the type to bully with low-rank undead, but with demigods. Of course, it was a future thing, but the potential was there. Also, Michael figured this group would likely struggle the most with the netherworld, as they relied on having a vast number of undead at their disposal. However, if they could summon and dismiss all their undead at will from the netherworld, they would be a terrifying force, truly the representative group for necromancers, to be called a one-man army. The last was the specialist necromancers, who focused on specific types of undead, such as mages, tanks, or assassins, to create powerful synergies within their forces. This type emphasized specialization and tactical advantages over brute strength or sheer numbers. Michael read with interest, and before he knew it, he arrived at the association. Chapter 42 Preparation to Enter a Dimensional Crack 4. Looking at the beautiful receptionist in front of him, who could barely maintain her professional smile, Michael couldn't help but smile bitterly. I'm not really good with new faces, so I prefer to talk with familiar people, Michael tried to explain. I understand, the receptionist replied, then added with a teasing tone. I'm just a little taken aback to see you 3 days in a row, sir. She emphasized 3 days in a row. Michael could only continue to smile bitterly. The receptionist was the same one he had interacted with over the past 3 days. He knew she was subtly teasing him. Perhaps if she weren't older than him and he hadn't come strictly for business, women with imaginative minds might have spun some quality taboo novels from their interactions. Of course, in reality, the receptionist was just surprised. As a professional, she wasn't supposed to be overly casual with clients, but their brief exchanges had made her a bit more familiar with Michael. From her observations, she knew he wouldn't mind. May I ask what your purpose for coming here today is, sir? She asked, resuming her professional tone. Michael got back to business as well. I'd like to know if there are any available cracks I can enter right now, he said seriously. Maintaining her composure, the receptionist responded, since it's only been a few days since you've awakened, I believe you're still a level 1 member, correct? Yes. Then, as a level 1 member, you only have access to level 1 and level 2 dimensional cracks, which coincidentally are the only ones we have here in Woodstone City, all which are also corrupted cracks. Can I ask which one is closest? Michael inquired, his main concern showing. He only had about 3 hours left before his daily evolution points refreshed. If he wanted to accumulate more than 4 a day without waiting another day, he needed to contract more undead within this time frame. As long as the closest crack wasn't the level 2 dimensional crack he'd heard about, which still bore a certain risk, he would prefer to avoid unnecessary risks, even with Lucky and Prince by his side. The closest dimensional crack to the association is the Goblin World, a corrupted type crack located about a 30-minute drive from here at Sun Park, the receptionist informed him. It seems to have been reserved. Oh, it looks like the party won't be coming after all. That means you don't need to apply for their team slot. Would you like to enter the crack alone? Or would you prefer to wait while I try to arrange a team for you from other parties that have reserved the crack later today? No need. I'll go in myself. Okay, please wait a moment, sir, while I upload your application to the database so the other side is aware of your entry. Once it's done, you'll just need to confirm your identity with your fingerprint there. Thank you. Michael was quite satisfied with the results he'd received. Before coming to the association, he already understood how dimensional cracks were managed. Similar to booking a hotel, entering a crack required an application. Monsters within the association's jurisdiction were considered renewable resources, but they didn't respawn instantly like in games. Well, they did, but the process was more complex than games depicted. There were 2 types of dimensional cracks: realm type and corrupted type. Realm type cracks were where other civilizations resided. It was a realm with its own natives like Aurora. Corrupted type cracks, on the other hand, were formed when chaotic mana gathered in areas rich with negative emotions. These cracks didn't form in empty places but instead thrived near populations, using absorbed negativity to generate chaotic creatures, the monsters. The reason corrupted cracks were considered renewable was their ability to continuously spawn monsters. But how could creatures appear from nothing? The answer was simple: negative energy. Humans, no matter how optimistic, couldn't entirely avoid negativity. It was an inherent part of their existence. What about isolating people from corrupted cracks to stop their growth? First, the absorption range of corrupted cracks was vast. If it were small, a city like Woodstone City with at least 2 million people would have far more than 3 corrupted cracks. Second, relocating everyone would lead to disasters, making such a move impractical. Lastly, corrupted cracks weren't without benefits. The monsters they produced, and more importantly, their corpses, were invaluable resources. Since he was visiting the association because of a crack, Michael hadn't limited his research to necromancers. He had also looked into cracks. Monster bodies were treasures, useful for potions, equipment, and more. With such renewable resources, it was no wonder the Federation didn't shy away from corrupted cracks, but instead embraced them. This realization also explained why the association stored monster corpses. In hindsight, Michael admitted he'd been slow to connect the dots. This should have been obvious. As for the limited number of corpses in the storage facility the scarred man had shown him, Michael concluded it must have been the publicly available stock, not the association's entire reserve. After all, they had their own uses for the corpses. Where else would potions and equipment come from? It also explained why the association bought monster corpses from awakeners and cultivators or gave them access to hunt in corrupted cracks. They were essentially hiring hunters indirectly. But there was more to corrupted cracks than just this. Why did entering require an application? Was it just a formality? Partly, but the primary reason was scheduling. Applications ensured awakeners and cultivators could enter cracks at designated times, leaving other periods for monster respawns. But did monsters really respawn that quickly? In fact, they did, and it was due to a unique property of dimensional cracks, time dilation. The smaller the crack space, the faster time flowed inside. Corrupted cracks usually had limited spatial dimensions, so time moved much faster. An hour in the real world could equal 10 hours inside the crack, allowing monsters to respawn rapidly. Wasn't this a pocket dimension? As several thoughts flashed through his mind, he watched the receptionist work on her computer, occasionally asking him a few questions. After several minutes, the questioning stopped, and the receptionist handed Michael a freshly printed piece of paper. Chapter 43: Work Smart, Not Hard. Here you go, sir, the receptionist said as she handed Michael the printed paper before continuing. When you get to the person in charge, please hand them this document. An email will also be sent to you with a list of things to look out for in the crack, ensuring you don't miss any opportunities. If you find items you don't need and wish to sell to the association, the email will include a list of items we're interested in, along with their prices. The exact location of the crack is written on the paper, so please refer to it when needed. Lastly, please remember that the inner workings of the association and most supernatural-related matters shouldn't be shared with the public, as stated in the email you received on the day you registered. There was something like that? Michael muttered to himself in confusion. Sir, the receptionist called out, her smile suddenly feeling sharp and unsettling. Haha, I was joking. Of course, I know this. It doesn't even need to be written down for me. Anyway, thank you for your time. Michael stammered as he quickly brushed it off and walked away. He could still feel the receptionist's suspicious gaze on his back. Only when it faded did he wipe the cold sweat from his forehead. As for what she mentioned being attached to his awakening email, Michael had no clue. It couldn't have been the one with the link to the Supers Association forum, as that was the only content contained. So it must have been part of the email containing the breathing and meditation techniques, something Michael admitted he hadn't been too interested in. No wonder he missed it. Then again, it wasn't like he even had the time to share what he'd learned over the past few days. With the way he had been darting between the land of origin and the real world, even a bee would be impressed. He skipped over the irrelevant details after quickly scanning them and focused on the section containing the crack's location. The receptionist had mentioned Sun Park, and Michael was familiar with the area, having visited it several times as a child. However, discovering that a corrupted crack existed, there was something he never would have expected. Sun Park wasn't just a park, it was a landmark in Woodstone City. Its fame also wasn't due to the park itself, but rather the establishments dominating the area. Known as the Clinic Market, 7 out of every 10 buildings in the vicinity were medical facilities. While unsettling, most residents of Woodstone City had grown used to the peculiar nickname. However, knowing there was a corrupted crack in the area made Michael pause. Corrupted cracks relied on negative energy to sustain themselves. Were better to absorb such energy than clinics or hospitals, where despair, pain, and grief often lingered. The Federation must have done this on purpose. Michael doubted the Federation would risk the public's safety without reason. After all, leaving a crack unattended for too long risked a monster outbreak, reminiscent of the chaos during the Dark Age, when cracks even gave no warning. The more negative energy the crack absorbs, the faster it can regenerate monsters. Maybe the park balances things out, as positive energy can neutralize negative. Still, too much positivity would defeat the purpose of maximizing the crack's value. If his assumptions were correct, Michael couldn't help but admire the strategic brilliance behind the decision. Yet, a sense of conflict stirred within him. The Federation wasn't the heroic entity he had envisioned growing up. Their actions were pragmatic, even calculated. While he could understand the necessity of such measures, it didn't sit well with him. Even so, Michael didn't hate the Federation. It was clear their efforts ultimately benefited the public, and that deserved respect. Still, he was shocked that a crack had existed unnoticed beneath so many people's noses for years. Or perhaps it wasn't entirely unnoticed. Some older residents might have figured it out, but likely not many. What surprised Michael more, though, was the crack's exact location, inside a pharmacy. According to the receptionist, all he had to do was hand the paper directly to the person in charge. More and more, it feels like I belong to some secret organization, which isn't too far from the truth, Michael muttered. To be honest, the thought was a little exciting to him. As he walked out of the association, anticipation and anxiety swirled within him despite the power he held and his strong lineup of Lucky and Prince. But then, he abruptly stopped in his tracks. For a moment, he stood still before his expression darkened. Damn it, I'm an idiot. Michael wanted to scream at himself as a sudden realization hit him. Why was he heading to a corrupted crack in the first place? Wasn't it because of the monsters it held? And why was he interested in the monsters? It was because he wanted to turn them into his undead army. A&F, why did he feel so pressed to contract more undead right now? It was because his daily evolution points would soon refresh. If he didn't increase the number of his undead within the next 3 hours, he'd miss out on a potential number of 11 evolution points and have to settle with 4. Contracting undead took time and mana, and failed attempts were always a possibility. If he rested between summons, 3 hours should be enough. But if he still had to hunt the monsters first, that would eat up precious time. Greedy? Michael knew he was. Every human was. Michael couldn't stand the idea of losing a good 24 hours of progress. Then it hit him. Didn't the association sell goblin corpses? Instead of wasting time hunting in the crack, he could simply buy what he could afford. Once he reached the crack, he could start using Undead Revival immediately. After all, leveling up could wait. His main concern was maximizing his evolution points. This was working smarter, not harder. Chapter 44, Buying More Monster Corpses. As Michael stood near the entrance of the association, lost in thought, the vibration of his phone in his pocket snapped him back to reality. He pulled out his phone and saw that it was an email from the association, the notification causing his phone to buzz. Michael unlocked his phone and opened the email. It contained a lot of information, including the location and details of the crack he was about to enter, far more detailed than the paper he held in his hand. Additionally, there was a list attached to the email. This is pretty user-friendly, Michael noted. Since the email is solely about the Goblin World corrupted crack, it's likely I'll receive similar emails in the future when I want to visit other cracks for the first time. However, his attention quickly shifted to the attached list, particularly the very first item. 1. Goblin Corpse, $500. This is even better, he muttered. I can earn back whatever money I spend here. Though, I'd have to kill 2 goblins just to make up the cost of buying 1 goblin corpse. And it even says the price can go up to and not exactly it. TSK, the association is as greedy as it is selfish. Having already made up his mind about his next steps, Michael turned away from the entrance and headed toward the trade center to purchase monster corpses. Upon reaching the trade center, Michael noticed a different face behind the counter. It wasn't the scarred man he'd seen yesterday. Though he briefly wondered why the other man wasn't there, he quickly brushed the thought aside. It wasn't something worth dwelling on as he and the scarred man weren't close. "Good morning," Michael greeted the middle-aged man at the counter. "Good morning to you too. How may I help you?" The man replied with a warm smile. "Do you still have monster corpses here?" "Yes, we do. Are you looking to purchase some?" "Yes, please." After explaining what he needed, Michael was once again led to the cold storage area where he'd been the day before. However, this time, he wasn't here for forest wolves. Why? Because they were far too expensive for him. At $4,000 per corpse, they were entirely out of Michael's current budget. His bank account balance was only enough to buy 3 again, which wasn't a sustainable option. Had Michael known about the abilities of his talent earlier, he wouldn't have wasted $12,000 on forest wolf corpses yesterday. Instead, he would have spent the entire amount on goblin corpses. Sure, goblins had trashy base stats, and their inherent weaknesses might carry over even after evolving, potentially making them weaker than forest wolves of the same rank. But that didn't matter. Michael had identified himself as a horde-type necromancer. His strategy was simple: overwhelm his enemies with numbers. He fought to dominate by sheer force of numbers, bullying his way to victory. Having a few high-quality undead was great, but not as great as having multiple quality undead. In any case, his undead could always evolve, so their weaknesses wouldn't remain constant forever. Unfortunately, Michael, unaware of the ability of his talent, had been more focused on getting the most value out of his previous purchases. Though he felt his earlier decisions had been a waste, Michael didn't regret them. At the very least, he had acquired Lucky and Prince, 2 strong rank 1 undead. It would have been the same case had he bought goblin corpses too, as his evolution points yesterday could only evolve a monster so far. It might have even cost more but Michael was still unsure. Did evolving a common rank undead by 1 star cost 1 evolution point each time, or did it raise a 1-star undead directly to 3 stars, regardless of its starting point? Now that he had several goblin corpses, all at 1 star, he would soon be able to figure it out. Unlike his cautious approach to buying forest wolves yesterday, Michael didn't even glance at the ranks of the monster corpses this time. He simply purchased 10 with the highest levels available. He currently had only 7 open slots left for summoning undead, but considering the risk of failure, he bought 3 extras. Hopefully, his luck wouldn't betray him. These corpses were all providers of evolution points, after all. The purchase cost him $10,000, nearly reducing him to the same broke state he'd been in before awakening. The pain of parting with such an amount was sharper than the sting of his first heartbreak back on Earth. Still, Michael wasn't too downhearted. At most, the goblins he was about to hunt would cover the damages. After completing his purchase and making the payment, Michael wasted no time leaving the association. He quickly hailed a taxi to Sun Park, the designated location for entering the crack. His allotted time in the Goblin World Corrupted Crack was from 11:45 a.m. to 1 p.m., and the clock currently read 11:20 a.m. Fortunately, there was still time. Michael wasn't in a frantic rush to enter the crack. As long as he arrived and checked in, he would be fine. That said, he still hurried to get there. Seated in the taxi, Michael used the time to reread the email the association had sent him about the Goblin World Crack. The email's content wasn't extensive, so within 10 minutes, he was done reading and left with nothing else to do except stare out the car window. He could have browsed the Supers Association forum, but Michael preferred to do that in a calm state of mind. Right now, he was far too preoccupied. Chapter 45: Entering a Crack for the First Time. After the taxi dropped Michael off in front of Sun Park, he quickly asked for directions to the pharmacy where the Goblin World Corrupted Type Dimensional Crack was located. Since he was in a rush, Michael didn't take the time to observe his surroundings and made his way to the designated pharmacy with haste. The pharmacy wasn't far from Sun Park, and with quick strides, Michael arrived in less than 5 minutes. Contrary to his expectations, the pharmacy looked exactly like an ordinary establishment, just slightly larger than usual. From the outside, Michael could see that there were no customers inside. Without hesitation, he pushed open the door and entered. Immediately, his eyes fell on an elderly man standing behind the counter. The man had gray hair, but his body exuded a youthful vitality rarely seen even in younger individuals. Suppressing the urge to use detect on the old man, Michael approached him to start a conversation. "Good morning," Michael greeted politely. His words revealed that he was still on time. It wasn't noon yet, at least not for another 5 minutes. The old man behind the counter smiled warmly and responded, "Good morning, boy. Is there anything you need?" "Yes, sir. The association sent me here." Michael got straight to the point, though he remained cautious not to reveal what association in case he was in the wrong place. Fortunately, it seemed he wasn't mistaken. "Oh, do you have the application paper with you?" the old man asked while retrieving a fingerprint scanner from underneath the counter. Seeing this, Michael was reassured that he had come to the right place. Wasting no time, he pulled the document the association's receptionist had given him out of his pocket. Though the paper looked a bit crumpled, it was still legible and neat. Luckily, the old man made no comment about the paper's condition. Instead, he calmly read through its contents without issue. "Okay, place your right thumb here," the old man, who appeared to be in his late 50s, instructed, pointing at the scanner on the counter. The scanner looked similar to the one the receptionist had used when registering Michael on the day of his awakening. Perhaps this was the Federation's standard scanner, Michael thought as his mind briefly wandered. Shaking off his thoughts, Michael complied and placed his thumb on the scanner. 2 seconds later, it emitted a green light. "Good, your identity has been confirmed. Follow me," the old man said, returning the scanner to its original place before gesturing for Michael to come around the counter. Michael hurried to comply. They passed through rows of neatly arranged medicine shelves before arriving at a sturdy-looking door. The old man placed his palm on a panel to unlock it. Beyond this door was another, secured by a password that he entered quickly. Michael couldn't help but be impressed by the security measures, though he still felt they were a bit lacking, depending on the circumstances. Of course, much of the defense likely relied on the old man himself. Although the man didn't exude the overwhelming, oppressive aura of the scarred man Michael had encountered at the trade center, there was something subtly dangerous about him. Michael's senses, while still developing, could pick up on a faint, underlying threat. This seemingly kind old man was far more dangerous than he appeared. After the second sturdy metal door was unlocked, Michael finally stood before the entrance of a dimensional crack for the first time. True to its name, it resembled a tear in empty space. Within the jagged opening was a swirling mass of black, chaotic mana. Even without knowing it was a corrupted-type dimensional crack, Michael could tell at a glance that it wasn't anything good. The ominous feeling it gave made him sweat slightly. For a moment, he felt as though something might erupt from the crack at any second. Why didn't I feel anything outside? Is it because of the door? Michael wondered, but he quickly dismissed the thought. When he focused on the walls flanking the crack and the floor beneath his feet, he could faintly sense an intricate network of magic circles surrounding him. Though invisible to the naked eye, he could feel their presence, almost as if they were etched into the air itself. Is this the magic formation they mentioned in the forums? Michael's thoughts didn't have the chance to go much deeper before the old man beside him spoke, snapping him back to reality. "Your information says you're an awakener, which should be obvious since you're entering a crack without carrying any kind of storage," the old man said. Michael could detect a slight trace of envy in his voice. Unlike the disdain he'd felt from the scarred man at the Association Trade Center yesterday, this reaction made sense to him. Being an awakener was, after all, an enviable status. "Be mindful of your surroundings once you're inside," the old man continued. "While it's unlikely that you'll land in a monster stronghold upon entry, there have been cases where it's happened. Stay alert." Michael was startled and opened his mouth to respond, but the old man cut him off. "That's all. You should have read the email the association sends to anyone visiting a dimensional crack, so I won't repeat the basics. Since you came here alone, I'll assume you're confident in your abilities, which is good. Just be cautious." The old man glanced at his watch. "It's 12 now, so you must be back before 1 p.m. The time difference between the real world and the crack is 10 to 1. 10 hours in the crack is equivalent to 1 hour here. Don't spend more than 10 hours inside, or you'll risk penalties. Once you're out, press the button behind the door, and I'll open it for you." He gestured towards the crack impatiently. "That's all. Enter quickly. I have other things to attend to." Michael blinked at the old man's brusque attitude, but decided not to comment. Taking a deep breath, he steeled himself. Determination flashed across his face as a gun materialized in his hand. Without hesitation, Michael leaped into the crack. Chapter 46, Goblin World. Michael felt his vision blur as he entered the crack. For a moment, all he saw was chaotic darkness. The next instant, he found himself in the middle of a vast forest. "Lucky," he called out. Without taking time to observe his surroundings, Michael gripped his gun tightly and summoned Lucky from the netherworld. A greenish-black circle materialized on the ground in front of him, and the silhouette of a massive wolf leapt out. It was Lucky. At the same time, Michael retrieved Prince from his storage space to guard his back. While Prince's mind remained frozen in time, unable to develop consciousness, Lucky was already alert. Sensing his master's unease through their link, Lucky immediately assumed a combat stance upon arrival. Fortunately, after a tense few seconds, nothing attacked. Michael finally let out a sigh of relief. While keeping the two on high alert, Michael finally took the time to survey his surroundings. Tall trees stretched high into the sky. Wide crowns formed a leafy canopy, allowing golden rays of sunlight to filter through. The forest floor, carpeted in moss and scattered leaves, glowed softly under the shifting light. The air was alive with the faint rustle of leaves. The sight was breathtaking. Though I've read about cracks containing entire worlds, seeing it in person is amazing. There was even a sun. As for wondering how many cracks might have their own individual sun like Aurora, he quickly brushed the thought aside. Still, something about this world unsettled him. The mana in this space feels scattered. No, it feels incomplete. It was hard to describe, but there was an odd sensation, a fragility, a weakness he hadn't felt in Aurora or the Land of Origin. He couldn't pinpoint what was wrong, but there was no time to dwell on it. "Prince, stay here with me and guard. Lucky, scout the surroundings and kill anything that moves." The moment he gave the command, Lucky vanished in a blur, leaving behind a gust of wind and a cloud of dirt. "Cough, cough. That stupid wolf. Do you think feeding your master dirt is funny? I'll start feeding you grass." Michael paused, remembering the time Lucky had tried to eat moss off a wall in the Land of Origin. Actually, he might enjoy that, Michael muttered, shaking his head to dismiss the ridiculous thought. Michael was genuinely surprised by the movement caused by Lucky's incredible speed. The speed itself was astonishing, leaving behind an afterimage as Lucky vanished from sight. Since rare rank creatures were said to rival awakeners who used attribute points, Lucky's stats had to far exceed 20 points for a human. Being a wolf, its speed should be even more terrifying. The strength of his undead truly satisfied Michael, but it also left him suspicious. Michael suspected it might have something to do with the nature of this world, but he couldn't confirm it without running tests in the other worlds. Just as he was about to continue inspecting his surroundings, several notification panels appeared before his eyes. Your undead Lucky has killed a level 3 goblin and gained 35 EXP. You've received feedback from your undead Lucky and gained 10 EXP. Your undead Lucky has killed a level 1 goblin and gained 14 EXP. You've received feedback from your undead Lucky and gained 4 EXP. Your undead Lucky has killed a level 5 goblin and gained 48 EXP. You've received feedback from your undead Lucky and gained 14 EXP. The notifications continued 4 more times before finally stopping. Did Lucky just wipe out an entire goblin group? Michael was both alarmed and stunned. He quickly focused on their link to sense Lucky's rough location. Noticing he could still pinpoint it, Michael deduced Lucky was within 100 meters. Unranked awakeners, whose souls don't undergo significant upgrades until they advance in rank, could only command and sense their undead within roughly 100 meters. This range varied slightly depending on talent, but generally stayed consistent at this distance. Coincidentally, this also matched the current range of Share Senses, a skill Michael gained when his intelligence stat hit 20 points. Share Senses, Michael muttered as he activated the skill and stepped closer to Prince. He didn't bother recalling Lucky, there was no need. Goblins posed no threat to Lucky, though Michael himself couldn't afford to be careless. Deciding to stay cautious, he used the skill to check on Lucky's situation. Immediately, his vision shifted. From a vibrant world of colors, it turned to stark black and white. Is this how the world looks to the undead? Michael murmured, momentarily intrigued. Lucky was standing amidst the mangled corpses of the goblins he had just slain. Even with the monochrome view, Michael easily recognized the grotesque forms of the creatures. He had a few in his storage space after all. The sight, however, caused Michael's heart to ache. Lucky, you idiot. Stop wasting money. Those corpses could feed you and your siblings. Panicking, Michael sent a mental command for Lucky to stay put, fearing the wolf would kill more goblins and waste precious resources. As for feeding his undead, Michael wasn't exaggerating. While undead didn't need to eat and had infinite stamina, there were indeed substances they could digest that provided benefits or simply appealed to their preferences. Michael was about to run to Lucky's location with Prince when he suddenly stopped and glanced at his other undead. Prince, what do you think about letting Daddy ride you? Yi Sha Hua Xian Yi. Prince stared at Michael, confusion evident in his newly awakened consciousness. As Michael addressed his undead, he turned to check how many experience points he had left to level up. Status. Name, Michael Norman. Class, Necromancer Apprentice. Level 5. EXP, 208/800. Strength, 6.1. Agility, 11.1. Constitution, 7.7. Intelligence, 30.3. Attribute points, 0. Skills, Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses. Talent, Infinite Evolution. Class Skill, Contract Slot, 3/10. Gift, Mark of Origin. Chapter 47 Thoughts. Michael knew his main priority now was creating more undead within the next 2 hours, but Lucky's actions of killing goblins sparked an idea. He had almost forgotten that when an undead killed a target, a portion of the gained experience points was transferred to the necromancer. At first glance, this might seem like a loss, as the necromancer would have earned more experience points by killing the target personally. However, necromancers were never meant to be frontline warriors. Their strength lay in commanding their undead minions to do the fighting for them. Moreover, the strength of an undead was directly tied to the strength of its master. Investing in the growth of his minions wasn't a waste. It was a strategic move. With his undead gaining experience and growing stronger, Michael could avoid putting himself in unnecessary danger while still gradually accumulating experience points to level up. This indirect approach to combat was the essence of a necromancer's playstyle, and it suited Michael perfectly. As someone who was particularly cautious about his safety, especially in the real world, Michael found this method of fighting to be both efficient and reassuring. Should I just wait until I fill my contract slots, or have Lucky kill monsters for me while Prince guards me? Michael muttered to himself. However, he soon shook his head at the thought. If someone's going to guard me, I'd rather it be Lucky. Weird as it is, Lucky is far more flexible and should be able to protect me better than Prince, whose intelligence is still lacking. Prince, who stood loyally by his master's side, couldn't help but feel that his master was thinking poorly of him. No, his master must be thinking ill of him. Why else would he look at him with that faint expression of disdain? It's something to think about, Michael continued, oblivious to Prince's thoughts. But for now, having more undead is the priority. Anyway, I have 10 hours here, so I can always level up later. If there are enough goblins, that is. Still, I could try killing a few goblins myself to level up faster and unlock more undead slots. Evolution points are crucial. I don't see myself being strong enough to personally face that gargoyle anytime soon, but with enough evolution points, my undead might. Michael doubted evolving Lucky to a 3-star undead would make it rank up to rank 2. It might only gain a few levels at most. However, evolving it to an extraordinary rank might do the trick, though the evolution points required would be significant. It had been barely 3 days since his awakening, and while he hadn't gained much from the land of origin to obsess over it, the restriction on exploring still frustrated him. Yet, given the opportunity presented by the suspected ruins at his initial location, he didn't want to risk rushing in and dying before reaping. Aside from not wanting to lose potential rewards in the ruins, Michael was already at the point where the 10% permanent loss of all stats upon death felt painful, especially for his intelligence stat. With that, Michael stopped mulling over the issue and hopped onto Prince's back. Head in this direction, boy. Let's go meet that wastrel called your older brother. __. For a brief moment, Prince wondered what his purpose in life was. The ride was incredibly short. It felt like only a second passed before Michael found himself standing in front of his first named undead, Lucky. It was thrilling, nonetheless. The gust of wind from the run had almost thrown Michael off Prince's back. For some reason, Michael felt as though the action had been deliberate. However, thinking about how his undead only had love for him, Michael dismissed the thought. How could they not love him? After all, he was their evolution plug. Prince. Surprisingly, despite the blood splattered everywhere from the goblins Lucky had slain, Michael wasn't disgusted by the sight or smell. Perhaps it was because goblins had green blood, and their form, while humanoid, was so far removed from humans that it didn't bother him, aside from the initial disgust. The smell of those things was so vile it could make even a fresh corpse gag in disgust. These are heavy losses, Michael muttered in pain, gazing at the mutilated remains of the goblins scattered around. He no longer blamed Lucky. He had, after all, ordered Lucky to kill whatever moved in the crack, but hadn't specified how. Lucky, while not acting in line with Michael's unspoken expectations, had followed the order to the letter. Whatever. This should still fetch something at the trade center, but it's better to have intact corpses like the ones I brought to maximize profits. Sure enough, riding you feels more majestic, Michael said with a pleased smile. Lucky's taller, more imposing appearance compared to Prince satisfied his vanity. Prince, degree. Let's move. The smell might attract more goblins, Michael ordered. Within moments, he and his undead left the area, searching for a more secluded spot. Killing monsters and gaining experience was great, but collecting evolution points? That was the real priority. Michael had his goal straight. Unfortunately, all Michael found was an endless expanse of forest and more goblins along the way, which Prince attended to with ease. This time, the method of killing was straightforward. A swipe of Prince's tail sent the goblins sprawling, and Michael finished them off with his gun, earning a steady stream of experience points. Afterward, Prince carefully lifted the goblin corpses with his mouth so Michael could place them into his storage space. Michael hadn't bothered to restock his limited bullets, knowing they would soon become useless. He had originally brought them for self-protection as part of his preparation for entering the land of origin. However, with Prince and Lucky by his side, his reliance on them had diminished and would only continue to do so. For now, though, the few rounds he had left were sufficient. Lucky also joined the fight, utilizing his racial skill, plant control, instead. It was Michael's first time seeing the skill in action, and it proved highly effective. The skill's binding effect was exceptional, preventing many of the goblins from escaping. Unfortunately, Lucky wasn't fully accustomed to the ability yet. If he were, he could have trapped the entire goblin group from the start, leaving Michael free to finish them all with his gun, using basic shot. As time ticked away, Michael grew frustrated and decided to start creating undead on the spot. He reasoned that if a goblin interrupted his skill, the worst outcome would be some mana loss. Also, he reflected on his earlier hesitation. He realized he had been overly cautious. Before any goblin could even reach him, they would likely be dead. With this thought in mind, Michael finally set aside his worries. He took out a relatively intact corpse he had obtained from the trade center and used Undead Revival on it. Chapter 48, More Undead. Including the goblins he had killed and the corpses brought from the association, Michael now had 24 usable materials for creating undead. This ensured that even if a revival attempt failed, he still had plenty of corpses to use, as long as he had enough mana. For the next 2 hours, Michael focused solely on casting Undead Revival on the goblin corpses, while Lucky and Prince, his 2 rank 1 undead, guarded him against any sneaky or ambushing goblins. For corpses that failed to revive after 3 attempts, Michael set them aside in a specific section of his storage space for easy identification. He planned to sell these failed corpses to the association, ensuring they knew they could no longer be used for revival. This way, he could avoid any penalties because of accusations of fraud. The price would be dirt cheap though, but extra money nevertheless. As for the undead he successfully revived, Michael kept them close, adding them to the defensive formation alongside Lucky and Prince. In the end, just as there were 3 minutes left before he received his daily evolution points, Michael finally managed to fill his remaining 7 open contract slots, going through a total of 15 monster corpses. Although he had hoped for a better outcome, this wasn't bad. Out of 15 attempts, he succeeded in reviving 7 undead. Essentially, he succeeded once every 2 tries. Michael was satisfied with the result. If his last attempt hadn't succeeded, he would have been left with only 6 undead due to his now depleted mana. For that, he was grateful. As the final 3 minutes ticked down to 10 seconds, Michael sat on the ground amidst his undead, waiting patiently. 10, 9, 8, 3, 2, 1. Your daily evolution points have arrived. 11 evolution points gained. After the notifications appeared, Michael quickly dismissed them and opened his talent panel to check his updated points. Talent: Infinite Evolution. Evolution points: 11. Evolvable. Lucky: Undead Verdant Wolf LV. 11. Insufficient evolution points. Can't be evolved. Prince: Undead Verdant Wolf LV. 11. Insufficient evolution points. Can't be evolved. Undead Forest Wolf LV. 5. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Undead Goblin LV. 5. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Undead Goblin LV. 5. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Undead Goblin LV. 4. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. There were 10 undead listed in total. As expected, the number of contract undead he had at the time of his daily evolution points refresh determined how many points he would receive. Michael was pleased to have his evolution points replenished again. This method of gaining points was far superior to relying on spirit crystals. Spirit crystals were not only rare and expensive, especially for an awakener in his situation, but they also had other critical uses that made exchanging them for evolution points less practical. Of course, if Michael had any spirit crystals right now, they would already have been traded for points. All things considered, his daily refresh was proving to be an excellent and consistent source. The main limitation now was his lack of contract slots, which was tied to his level. More levels meant more slots, enabling him to raise additional undead. Goblins were prolific breeders, reaching adulthood in mere days and hitting their 1-star common rank limit quickly. With time flowing 10 times faster in this space compared to the outside world, these creatures had plenty of opportunities to multiply and develop. Although Michael had already wiped out 3 goblin groups, it likely accounted for less than 1% of the total population here. If that was the case, this crack was an excellent place to level up. Though Michael was excited about his newly refreshed evolution points and tempted to evolve his new undead race to see its rare rank look, he decided to hold off for now. He planned to follow the same approach as the previous day, evolve his undead in the land of origin while resting his original body back at home. Now that he had evolution points, there was no need to rush. It was more efficient to spend his time in the crack leveling up, aiming to increase his level by at least 1. This would free up more contract slots, allowing him to summon additional undead and generate even more evolution points tomorrow. Michael had already noticed that even with 11 evolution points, it wasn't enough to increase Lucky's or Prince's potential. This made acquiring more points an urgent priority. While evolving his main force was essential, neglecting his other undead wasn't an option either. Ultimately, it all came back to one critical goal: more evolution points. With determination surging through every fiber of his being, Michael transported his undead and the collected corpses to the land of origin via his storage space. Once ready, he set out with Lucky and Prince to hunt more goblins. Having already spent 2 hours in the crack, he had less than 8 hours left before risking a penalty from the association. For the next several hours, Michael did nothing but kill goblins, store their corpses in the land of origin, and repeat. In the first hour, he leveled up to level 6. 2 hours later, he reached level 8. 3 hours after that, with less than 2 hours remaining, Michael leveled up to level 9. Status: Name: Michael Norman. Class: Necromancer Apprentice. Level 9. EXP: 112/2000. Strength, 7.3, 1.2 carat. Agility, 13.1, 2.0 carat. Constitution, 8.9, 1.2 carat. Intelligence, 34.3, 4.0 carat. Attribute points, 24. Skills, Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses. Talent, Infinite Evolution. Class Skill, Contract Slot, 10/18. Gift, Mark of Origin. Chapter 49, Leaving the Crack. Though goblins were among the weakest monsters, with even less potential than slimes, yes, slimes, and provided less experience compared to some monsters of the same level, their sheer numbers made up for it. In just 6 hours, Michael ran through the majority of the crack space, clearing all the goblins he encountered with Lucky and Prince. The gains were significant. For one, he gained 4 levels, bringing him to level 9. Additionally, he stored numerous monster corpses in the Land of Origin, where his other body and new undead were stationed. Selling them should bring him good profit. Another noteworthy achievement was his first taste of close combat. With his bullets finally depleted, Michael used the iron refined spear he had bought from the Super Association's online store. The result? Close combat isn't so scary after all, Michael thought, growing more confident. However, despite hours of fighting with the spear, the skill of spearmanship never appeared. On bone of his aimless stroll through the forum, Michael learned that weapons could have their own skills to guide mastery levels. It made sense since weapon-related classes also had class skill. For example, a swordsman's swordsmanship skill would start at intermediate mastery, which could instantly turn a novice into a veteran. Even after failing to gain a spear-related skill, Michael wasn't discouraged. While he didn't plan to change his combat style, having the skill would boost his personal strength. He resolved to dedicate more time to spear training when possible. If weapon-related skills existed, it was likely that veteran awakeners from decades ago, regardless of their class, had mastered weapon skills, giving them an undeniable edge. Perhaps even a tailor could secretly be a sword expert. The world inside the crack is really big, Michael thought as he made his way toward the crack's exit, which had opened after he killed all the goblins in this corrupted-type crack. Fortunately, one only needed to kill a third of the monsters within a corrupted crack for the exit to appear. However, if it wasn't entered within 10 minutes, it would disappear and reappear only after another third of the monsters were killed, repeating until all the creatures were eliminated. Only then will the exit not disappear. Michael, however, had been merciless, killing all the goblins instead. Michael was drenched in green blood, not his own, but that of the countless goblins he had slain. His green eyes gleamed with a murderous intent, tainted by the eerie necromantic energy that had corrupted his once clean aura. This was a consequence of repeatedly casting necromancy spells in the real world using his original body. He had killed hundreds of goblins, accumulating more than 4,000 EXP in 6 hours. Leveling up had been demanding. Level 6 required 800 EXP, Level 7 needed 1,000, Level 8 required 1,200, and Level 9 demanded 1,500. A place like the Goblin World, teeming with monsters, was perfect for such rapid progression. The intoxicating pace of improvement filled Michael with a hunger for more. Yet, he understood that this fast leveling was only possible in the early stages. As he progressed, the grind would become exponentially harder. Even now, as an unranked awakener, it had taken killing hundreds of goblins to achieve just 4 levels. At least Michael had managed to level up. Lucky and Prince's experience progress wasn't even halfway to their next level. This was largely because Michael had secured most of the kills, while Lucky and Prince mainly used their skills to trap the goblins. However, even if one of them had hunted all the monsters in the crack alone, the experience would have barely been enough for a single level up. Hundreds of lives were needed just to level up once, and reaching rank 2 at level 26 was still over 10 levels away. If he continued hunting only goblins, how many lives would he need to take to reach that milestone? Seems like I'll need to visit that level 2 crack and apply for more crack entries, Michael planned. His mindset was shifting. After fighting and killing goblins, watching their blood spill, Michael had shed some of his caution and was now more willing to take risks for greater rewards. Level 2 cracks could contain at most a peak rank 2 creature, which either Lucky or Prince should handle alone or together without much trouble. At the very least, with their combined abilities, escaping from danger wouldn't be a problem. Leveling up had also made Michael stronger. If he allocated his attribute points to his physical stats, he might be able to handle most rank 2 creatures or escape if necessary. However, now that he was a true necromancer, he wouldn't waste his potential on such a basic approach. However, all of this would have to wait until after he left the crack. Michael glanced at his blood-soaked body and hoped the pharmacy would have a place for him to clean up. He hadn't really considered the practical issues of entering a crack. There was going to be fighting, but he hadn't even packed a spare set of clothes. There was also something that confused him. Michael had killed over 300 goblins, and 1/3 of that would be a little more than 100. Other people would typically kill around 100 goblins to make the exit appear, but how did they transport the bodies? Outside the crack was a pharmacy, and beyond that was the world of ordinary people. Supernaturals were still warned not to reveal anything to the public. So how did others transport their kills? For some reason, a part of Michael felt that his identity as an awakener made his approach to these situations different from the common sense of other supernaturals due to his unique abilities. In simpler terms, he was a little dense. But this was due to his lacking knowledge. One couldn't forget that Michael was still just an ordinary human whose life had changed drastically in barely 3 days. Compared to how most people would react to such a change, he was adapting well. Perhaps it was due to his original body's temperament or his past life mental strength, but he was only in his early 20s on Earth. It could very well be a combination of both. As several thoughts and plans raced through Michael's mind, he stepped into the crack. Chapter 50 Back to the Association 1. Michael returned to a familiar, dimly lit room. Well, not exactly familiar, just the confined space that held the crack leading to the goblin world. Turning to look behind him, Michael noticed the crack still had its chaotic appearance but seemed tamer than before. It was still chaotic, just not as overwhelmingly so as it had been 6 hours ago, or rather, less than an hour in the real world. Cracks, if controlled, could be treasures. One could train inside for 10 years, while only a year passed in the real world. Perhaps the Federation had already harnessed such a capability, though Michael wasn't qualified to know yet. As for the crack's reduced chaotic energy, he figured it was likely due to his complete extermination of the monster population within it, leading it to enter a state of recovery. Monsters in corrupted-type cracks were born from concentrated negative energy and bred quickly, as the cracks accelerated their growth. Even with regular cleanups, there had still been over 300 goblins. Usually, no one wiped out all the monsters in a crack, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. Despite their weakness, goblins were still rank 1 monsters in the cultivation system. Cleanup efforts were often limited to earning rewards while preventing crack outbreaks, where monsters spilled into the real world, causing harm to the general population. While goblins seemed weak from Michael's perspective, they were deadly threats to ordinary people. Even new awakeners or early-stage rank 1 cultivators weren't exempt. For newly ascended rank 1 cultivators, goblins were especially challenging. Goblins often moved in groups, with the weakest being as strong as a full-grown adult. Without skills or proper training, newly awakened individuals were no better off than those novice cultivators. Michael shifted his gaze from the crack and headed for the door of the room. Recalling the instructions, he pressed the button behind the door as the old man had told him earlier. After pressing it, he waited. 5 minutes later, there was movement from the other side, and the door finally opened. The old pharmacist appeared, but before Michael could ask if there was a place to clean up, the man's expression shifted. His face tightened into a frown as his eyes locked on Michael. "Why is the chaotic energy less intense than before?" the old man asked, his voice cold and sharp. As he spoke, a threatening aura radiated from him, suffocating the air in the room. Gone was the kind, gentle demeanor of the elderly man from the pharmacy. What stood before Michael now was an old predator, exuding the presence of someone who had just awakened from a dormant state. "I don't know," Michael stammered, trying to form a response. For one, he truly didn't know why the crack had appeared tamer. He suspected it was linked to wiping out all the monsters, but he wasn't certain. Secondly, the old man's overwhelming aura was far stronger than Michael had anticipated. It didn't just rival Lucky's, it surpassed it. Are all old men so powerful nowadays? Michael thought, the image of the scarred old man from the land of origin flashing across his mind. He was just about to steady himself and share his suspicions when the suffocating aura suddenly vanished, replaced by the old man's warm and kind smile. "Oh, did you kill all the monsters in the crack, boy?" the old man asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. "Yes," Michael replied. "Ah, no wonder it's less intense now. The crack is probably trying to recover by creating new babies." The old man chuckled lightly. How does his face change so fast? Michael thought, feeling slightly unnerved. "Don't be annoyed by my earlier reaction," the old man said apologetically. "The crack is vital to Woodstone City and the Federation. I can't help but be alarmed if I think something has gone wrong with it. Besides, I'd be in a lot of trouble if it had." His genuine tone and remorseful expression dissolved Michael's sour mood. "If I were in his position, I'd probably act the same," Michael admitted to himself. Michael nodded at the apology, pondering how to ask the old man if the pharmacy had a place where he could clean up. Before he could gather his words, the old man's attention shifted from the crack to him. "You're quite ruthless, boy. But calm down. Your murderous intent is too strong. If you go home like this, you'll probably scare the living daylights out of everyone. Unless you live alone. And what's with this gloomy aura around you?" Michael blinked, taken aback by the old man's blunt remarks, and was just about to respond when the man continued. "Still, there doesn't seem to be anything wrong with you. Just take a rest, or better yet, don't go home tonight if it'll take time for you to get your bearings. Now follow me." From start to finish, the old man moved at his own pace, leaving Michael no choice but to comply. Besides, Michael was too drained to take the initiative in the conversation. Fortunately, after leaving the crack, the old man led him to another hidden room. This one a spacious bathhouse, clearly designed to accommodate multiple people. It seemed bathing services were common for hunters who frequented the area. However, there was still one glaring issue. "You didn't bring a spare set of clothes?" The old man gave Michael a strange look before adding mercilessly, "What kind of newbie are you?" He was just about to ask if the old man had spare clothing when the man interrupted again. "All right, never mind. Just get yourself cleaned up, you stink. I'll find you something to wear, but hurry up. I've got other matters to deal with." "Thank you," Michael said quickly, grateful despite the old man's gruff tone. Chapter 51. Back to the Association 2. "This fits you really well," the old man said, gazing at the oversized clothes he had picked out for Michael from a nearby store with a look of satisfaction. Michael could only roll his eyes discreetly at the old man's attitude. The clothes were of high quality. Michael figured they must have cost quite a bit, but the problem was that they were too big. Not so oversized that they looked like hand-me-downs from an older relative, but just enough to feel like they'd been passed down from an older brother. Still, Michael felt touched by the old man's gesture. After trying the clothes on, he had intended to ask how much they had cost so he could pay the old man back later. However, the old man had looked ready to flare up at the mere suggestion. Apparently, asking about the price was considered insulting, and the old man had firmly insisted that Michael accept the clothes as a gift rather than talk nonsense. Michael recalled his aunt saying that older people often had peculiar temperaments, but this was the first time he had encountered such an instance himself. He reasoned that perhaps older people, whether they were ordinary humans or cultivators, tended to be well off and prone to such behavior. Regardless, Michael made a mental note to remember this favor. He also reminded himself that unless he wanted to wander the streets naked in broad daylight, he should make better preparations before entering another crack. Not everyone in charge of a crack would be as kind as this old man. "Thank you, sir. But before I leave, may I ask what I should call you?" Michael asked. He was genuinely curious about the old man, and felt it would be improper not to at least know the name of someone who had helped him. "Just call me Old Man Lou. Now get going and return to the association so you can submit your corpses for sale. And remember, if you want to collect the other corpses from the crack, your transportation better be here within an hour. After that, those corpses will start to rot, and you won't get much for them." Michael was momentarily stunned by the old man's words. Coincidentally, Old Man Lou had answered a question that had been on Michael's mind. How did non-awakeners transport their corpses from cracks? Sure, they could bring their own storage bags, but unless they functioned like his unique storage space, Michael doubted the bags could hold much, especially not enough monster corpses for a large team. Of course, it was also possible that most people didn't take entire monster corpses, instead opting to harvest only valuable parts. He remembered the list attached to the email the association had sent him about Goblin World. It didn't just specify goblin corpses, it also included items like their blood and other materials. Perhaps that was what most people gathered. If so, it made sense that a team's storage bags would suffice for a crack visit. But what if someone wanted to bring more? The old man's earlier comment provided the answer. Visitors to cracks could bring their own transportation. When Old Man Lou mentioned this, Michael couldn't help but think of trucks. No wonder there's a garage attached to the pharmacy, he muttered to himself. I thought that was a weird design. Michael figured this was likely another hidden function of the pharmacy. Considering it already had doors to another dimension and even a bathroom, it wasn't far-fetched to assume it could also provide a cover for transporting harvested monster parts for sale. SEO arched the NOVROLFIR.net website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. Michael had only recently become a part of the supernatural world. Before that, he had been a struggling youth, so it was natural for him to be unaware of these logistics. Perhaps wealthier and more influential people, like Leo Vanni, who had even suggested he buy corpses from the association, would know much more about this society. Michael hadn't forgotten about the existence of places that bred monsters either. He figured that, just like him, most average people were probably oblivious to such things. Only the rich and powerful would have access to that kind of information. Even in the supernatural world, there were differences. There's no need for that, Old Man Lou. I already have them all packed, Michael said. Okay, that's good. Then get going. You've been interrupting my business for too long. Michael wanted to retort that there probably wasn't any business happening at the pharmacy. He'd been here for so long and hadn't seen a single customer. But he was wise enough to keep that thought to himself. All right, Old Man Lou. Take care. See you later, Michael said with a wave. See you later too, the old man replied gruffly. Just like that, Michael finally left the pharmacy, the crack, and Old Man Lou behind. He hailed a taxi and headed back to the association. Once there, he made his way directly to the trade center. It was finally time to earn some money. After this, he planned to visit the receptionist to apply for more crack entries. With that gargoyle blocking his way in the land of origins, he had no choice but to focus on making himself stronger in the real world while accumulating evolution points. Leveling up through battles alone would be too slow, but Michael figured that with enough evolution points, it wouldn't take long to create an undead strong enough to deal with the gargoyle. It would need to be either a higher rank undead or a level 21, 3-star rare rank 1 to stand a chance without taking a severe beating. As for going home, Michael had reconsidered after hearing Old Man Lou's comment about his murderous intent. It didn't seem like something ordinary people would react well to, so he decided to delay his return. He'd messaged Aunt Mia about it, and to his surprise, she'd immediately called him. Wasn't this woman supposed to be busy at work? After he'd vaguely explained that he had some business to take care of, Aunt Mia hadn't flared up as he'd expected. Instead, she simply told him to take care of himself several times. Michael could hear the subtle sadness in her voice, which made him feel a little guilty but also somewhat relieved. Unfortunately, this meant he wouldn't be able to enjoy her cooking today. Apparently, his cousin was in for a good meal instead. Michael knew that girl would never let his share go to waste, especially when it involved beast meat. Chapter 52 Another source of evolution points. Seems like I'm about to become a drug addict. Lucky one. Michael had another purpose at the trade center. It was related to his evolution points. Michael placed the highest priority on anything that could help him with them. He didn't believe there were only a few limited ways to increase his evolution points. There had to be other methods beyond simply waiting for them to refresh daily or absorbing spirit crystals. Michael's theory about his evolution points was that they were generated from the overflow of soul energy absorbed by his talent from him and his undead. This gave him a potential direction to explore. If he could find items that could recover or enhance soul energy, would his evolution points also increase? Whatever the case, it had to be more cost-effective than relying on spirit crystals. Not only did it need to be cheaper, but it also had to be efficient enough to make the investment worthwhile. The novel, F. hired a NUT website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. Soon, Michael arrived at the trade center, where a slight surprise awaited him. The person he encountered wasn't the man he had seen an hour ago, but the scarred man from yesterday. Michael couldn't deny that the man intimidated him a little. "Good afternoon," Michael greeted as he approached. "Good afternoon. What do you want?" the scarred man replied curtly. There was no recognition in his tone or demeanor, which made the atmosphere feel even more strained as he got straight to business. "I'm here to sell monster corpses and buy some items as well." "The corpses are quite a lot," Michael explained. "Uh-huh. I see," the man muttered with a slight look of interest before asking, "What type of monster?" "Goblins," Michael replied, watching as the faint interest in the scarred man's eyes instantly vanished. But then Michael added, "I have about 300 corpses here." "You what?" For the first time since they'd met, a different expression appeared on the man's face. Michael felt a flicker of satisfaction. Finally, he had cracked the stoic demeanor of the scarred man. It made him feel like his near genocide of goblins in their world was worth it, not just for the income, but for this reaction as well. However, he quickly shook his head. "Why do I care about changing this guy's expression?" Michael didn't have time to reflect further, as the scarred man recovered from his shock and finally spoke. "Did you hunt them yourself?" the scarred man asked. For some reason, Michael noticed that his tone seemed less cold. "Yes, I went to the Goblin World Corrupted Crack today and, kind of wiped them out," Michael replied hesitantly. As he spoke, a sudden thought crossed his mind. Maybe I was a bit too murderous. No, they were just EXP and money. Killing them isn't a sin, Michael told himself firmly. Yeah, I'm not the problem here. Oddly enough, the scarred man seemed to follow a similar train of thought. He even let out a short laugh, startling Michael. "Haha, that's great. This is how our Federation's youths should be, domineering." Michael got the distinct impression that if he had been standing closer, the man might have given him a pat on the shoulder. Thankfully, after making his statement, the scarred man switched back to business mode. This time, though, he seemed a bit kinder. "Follow me. We need to check the quality of the corpses and determine the price." "Yes." Though Michael found the scarred man's accommodating behavior a bit unfamiliar, he quickly adapted. They walked side by side, bypassing any doors this time, until they reached a staircase leading to a well-lit underground space. The area was surprisingly spacious. Or rather, the Supers Association branch itself was massive. If this was just a branch, Michael couldn't help but wonder how enormous the headquarters would be. Under the scarred man's supervision, Michael began summoning the goblin corpses he and his undead had killed. The process took some time, especially since he had to transfer the corpses from the land of origin to the real world via his mark of origin, a process involving multiple steps. By the time the scarred man finished appraising the corpses, nearly 2 hours had passed. The results, however, left Michael thrilled. $100,000? Michael felt overwhelmed with emotion. $100,000. The past him wouldn't have imagined earning this much in a day. Even the current him hadn't expected goblins to fetch such a sum. This was thanks to Michael's deliberate strategy of delivering intact corpses. The large quantity he sold, each goblin corpse averaging at least $300, had added up quickly. Had they been significantly stronger, like at the peak of their potential, the amount might have been a little higher. Most of the goblins didn't even surpass level 4. "I can see you killed these monsters with some sort of spear-like weapon," the scarred man said. "But even the one-hit kills show your inexperience. Since you've got money now, I suggest buying a spear technique manual and a decent weapon to go with it. Of course, this is just advice." "Thank you," Michael replied earnestly, surprised at how much the man could deduce just by examining the corpses. As he suspected, this scarred man was most likely an expert. As for the suggestion, Michael decided to give it a try. Training with a manual seemed far better than fumbling around without guidance. He might even unlock the spearmanship skill. The scarred man wasn't finished yet. Also, while it's good to push yourself, you need to control your emotions. If not, you risk losing yourself to the madness of killing, or worse, turning demonic. Look at yourself now. Don't you feel better? Michael paused, stunned. Though the man hadn't said it outright, he was likely referring to the murderous intent that old man Lou had mentioned earlier. He focused inwardly, just as the scarred man suggested, and noticed something. His thoughts felt calmer, clearer. It was hard to describe, but his mind felt more peaceful than it had hours ago. Is it because my murderous intent is subsiding? Michael wondered. Still, he thanked the scarred man. For some reason, two people had gone out of their way to help him today, and Michael was genuinely grateful. What he didn't realize was that their goodwill stemmed from him, too. Chapter 53, another source of evolution points. Seems like I'm about to become a drug addict. Lucky too. Okay, let's head back. Someone will come and take care of the corpses, the scarred man said to Michael as he approached a wheel-like controller on the wall and turned it. Instantly, the space grew colder. The room had already been cold, which was why no smell emanated from the corpses, but now the temperature plunged further. Michael guessed it was as cold as the storage room he'd been led to before, a temperature perfect for preserving bodies. After adjusting the cooler, the scarred man led Michael out of the room. They moved quickly, making their way to the front of the trade center. All right, what do you want? I remember you saying you were here to buy something, the scarred man asked. Yes, Michael replied. What is it you're looking for? The man asked again. Let's start with a spear manual. Do you have one here? Hearing Michael's request, the scarred man paused for a moment, a slight smile creeping onto his face. I do have some, he said. But I wonder, are you willing to hear another piece of advice from me? SEA the novelfire.net website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. Was Michael willing? Of course, he was. While he didn't know the exact rank of the scarred man, Michael felt it had to be at least commander level, equivalent to rank 3 in the cultivation system. It could even be higher, as the scarred man exuded a far stronger presence than Old Man Lou. However, Michael, still inexperienced, was cautious about jumping to conclusions. Regardless, to the current Michael, both the scarred man and Old Man Lou were figures worth listening to. Please, advise me, senior, Michael said reflexively, taking the role of a junior. His subconscious, influenced by countless readings on forums where high-ranking members were addressed as seniors and lower-ranking ones as juniors, had shaped this respectful response. Haha, it's okay. Just call me Teacher Brian, the scarred man said. Strangely, when Brian spoke and introduced himself as a teacher, it didn't feel out of place. It was as if he was simply stating a fact about himself. Michael, though confused as to why the scarred man had suddenly given a name, and one with teacher in it, quickly reacted. Please advise me, Teacher Brian, Michael said, his tone just as enthusiastic as before. Good, Brian nodded in satisfaction before continuing. Right now, what you need is not fancy spear techniques, but a strong foundation in the fundamentals. Only when you truly understand the basics of spearmanship can you advance smoothly on this path. Especially as an awakener, though I won't claim to know everything about your kind. I do know that you progress best when you fully grasp a skill. So, master the basics first before diving into the more elaborate techniques. And don't dismiss the basics just because they seem simple or weaker. In the end, even the most advanced techniques are just combinations of fundamental moves. Think of it like boxing, an uppercut, a jab, a side punch. They're all just punches, but they're incredibly effective when executed well. Listening to Brian's explanation, Michael felt as though he'd been enlightened. At the same time, it made him even more curious about Brian. Maybe he really is a teacher, Michael thought. Everything he says is simple to understand, yet profound enough to open new perspectives. Brian's advice made Michael happy, but it also deepened his desire to enter an academy. One piece of advice from Brian had already clarified and solidified his plans regarding spears. He couldn't help but imagine how much an academy could contribute to his future. Though Michael didn't doubt that his talent would allow him to grow independently, he knew that the path to power would likely be twice as difficult without the structured guidance an academy could offer. It reminded him of something his principal had once said. While it's possible to cultivate alone, it's foolish to ignore the easier path laid down by the efforts of countless ancestors to make the journey smoother and less troublesome. Beyond just knowledge, an academy would also grant Michael access to resources and opportunities he couldn't easily find on his own, like rituals for undead summoning, for instance. There is, Brian replied, but you don't need to buy it here. You can just purchase the PDF version from the forum store. PDF? Michael was stunned. Yes, what's wrong with that? And nothing, Michael stammered. To be honest, Michael had expected manuals like this to only exist in physical form. But a virtual version? Where was the respect for martial arts? The solemnity? Did none of that matter anymore? Had technology advanced so much that it had completely ignored tradition and feelings? As a flood of nonsensical thoughts ran through his head, Michael composed himself and spoke again. Thanks for your advice, Teacher Brian. It's okay. Now that the manual is settled, is there anything else you want, or should I transfer your money to you? Actually, I'd still like to get something else. I wonder if there's anything here that can substitute the effect of a spirit crystal, especially something that affects the soul or enhances or recovers it. Brian contemplated for a moment before replying. For the latter, items that enhance or recover the soul don't exist in a branch like this. But for the former, there is one item that can substitute the effect of a spirit crystal and even recover soul energy. What is it, sir? Michael asked, excitement creeping into his voice. It's called Spirit Source Liquid. It's made by mixing the powder of a spirit crystal with other materials. It can boost the effectiveness of cultivation by 3 times for several days and costs about the same as a mana crystal, for $1,500. It's mostly used by knight apprentices and rank 1 knights. For rank 1 mages, it can recover 20% of their soul energy, though it's rarely used by mages since spells requiring soul energy are usually beyond their reach at that rank. Why does it cost the same as a mana crystal when it's only as effective as a mana stone? Michael asked curiously. It's because it's easier to absorb than a mana stone, Brian explained. Mana stones contain impurities, so drawing energy from them takes time and effort. Spirit Source Liquid, on the other hand, works immediately. You just need to ingest it, and the effect kicks in right away. Hearing this, Michael finally understood. However, his primary concern wasn't cultivation. It was whether this liquid would be effective in gaining evolution points and how efficient it might be. Could you please bring one for me to see? Michael asked politely. Sure, Brian replied. But just so you know, we have different grades here. There's one that works for cultivator apprentices and rank 1 cultivators, and another for rank 2 cultivators. They have the same effects, but as you'd expect, the stronger the person, the need for a stronger resource, and the higher the cost. The rank 2 version is slightly more expensive, priced at $7,000. Michael thought for a moment before responding. Then please bring me one of each to see. Both prices were cheaper than an unranked spirit crystal, but Michael still needed to confirm whether the liquids were effective for his talent and, more importantly, how well and if they could help him gain evolution points. After hearing Michael's request, Brian stepped to the side and brought out several transparent bottles filled with blue liquid, placing them on the counter. On this side, Brian said, gesturing, is the Spirit Source Liquid that works for apprentices and the rank above them. And on this side is the one effective for rank 2 cultivators. And don't ask why I brought out several bottles. You're probably going to use those eyes of yours to figure out which one's better. So check them out. If you like them, I'll bring out more. I'm not going to waste time fetching extra bottles if you're not even planning to buy one. Brian's blunt words made Michael feel slightly embarrassed since they were entirely true. Michael had fully intended to use Detect to determine the quality of the liquids, and, if he found a better one, would have asked for more. Thankfully, Brian had read his intentions from a mile away. Without wasting any more time, Michael activated Detect on the bottles displayed before him. Unranked Spirit Source Liquid. Rank, Common. It has a rank. Michael thought excitedly. If the liquid had a rank, it meant there was a chance for higher quality versions. Sure enough, after inspecting the other bottles, Michael found one. Unranked Spirit Source Liquid. Rank, Common. However, this higher quality was only found among the bottles of liquid effective for rank 2 cultivators. So to the panel, they're all unranked items, Michael noted. It made sense, though. These liquids were far inferior to an unranked spirit crystal, so it wouldn't make sense for them to be ranked higher unless they had something special about them. Still, this wasn't Michael's main concern. It was finally the moment of truth. Would Spirit Source Liquid have any effect on his talent and increase his evolution points? Under Brian's suspicious gaze, Michael nervously picked up the highest quality Spirit Source Liquid, unscrewed the cap, and swallowed the contents in one gulp. 1 second passed. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. +1 evolution point. Chapter 54. Another source of evolution points. Seems like I'm about to become a drug addict. Lucky 3. Plus 1 evolution point. Michael could hardly believe his eyes. He had hoped for something like this to happen, but now that it had, he found himself frozen, unable to react immediately. Noticing Michael's odd behavior, Brian spoke up. "Is something the matter?" he asked. Michael shook his head. "No, it's nothing," he replied, brushing off the question. Without wasting another moment, he grabbed another bottle of the better quality source liquid and drank it. Brian's gaze lingered, suspicion deepening, but Michael couldn't care less. He needed to confirm it, whether or not he had truly gained an evolution point. He knew he had. The notification panel confirming an additional evolution point had flashed before his eyes. But seeing it once wasn't enough. He needed reassurance, a second confirmation. Without hesitation, Michael unscrewed the cap of the source liquid bottle and downed its contents. It tasted bitter, but the thought that this could be another source of evolution points made it feel almost sweet. Plus 2 evolution point. It works. Michael felt like jumping up in excitement, but he managed to control himself in the end. However, the panel that had just appeared puzzled him. Why had he gained 2 evolution points this time, while the previous bottle had only given him 1? A little confused, Michael turned his gaze to the spirit source liquids below 3 stars. Of course, he completely ignored the 1-star bottles. As he studied the source liquids and reflected on the inconsistency in evolution points from the 2 he had just consumed, a suspicion formed in his mind. But to confirm it, he needed to test his theory. Although Michael had plenty of money, spending it on experiments like this was far from economical. Yet, this situation was different. It was directly tied to his talent. If spending more money could help him gain evolution points or uncover a pattern, then it was worth every coin. To Michael, nothing money could buy compared to the effect of his talent. He was starting to view money as a mundane tool, a resource to fuel his growth. This was currently its only use, and the reason it was still important to have. With this mindset, Michael selected 3 2-star common rank source liquids and began consuming them one by one. The first bottle. Nothing. Am I wrong? Michael wondered, doubting his suspicion for a moment. But it was only the first try. Too early to draw conclusions. Setting the empty bottle aside, Michael reached for the second source liquid. This time, a notification flashed before his eyes. Another evolution point. Excitement surged within him. Unfortunately, the third bottle yielded nothing, leaving Michael with mixed emotions. However, his current experience made him believe his suspicion a little. Even within the same star rating, there are differences, Michael thought, and it made sense. For the 2-star source liquids, the ones that gave him nothing were likely inferior, barely meeting the 2-star threshold. Meanwhile, the one that granted him an evolution point was probably near the 3-star level, making it excellent. This also explained the variance in the 3-star source liquids he had consumed earlier. One had been inferior, while the other was either standard or excellent. Still, it was clear that 3-star source liquids were a better investment overall. At least, they seemed to guarantee a single evolution point most of the time. "Are you okay, boy? Isn't taking too many of these going to harm you?" Brian's voice broke through Michael's thoughts, pulling him back to the present. "No, nothing like that, Teacher Brian. The source liquids don't affect me," Michael said casually, brushing the concern aside without offering further explanation. "Then," he added, "also, could you bring out more of your stock for me to pick from?" Brian paused and said nothing for a while. "All right, but you do realize it's quite a hassle to move all this around, don't you?" "I'm only doing this because you're an awakener, and because I don't feel like making a fuss right now. See Teacher Novel Fire. Net website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. Thank you, Teacher Brian." Michael quickly expressed his gratitude. He understood the man's frustration. To Michael, even the thought of someone asking him to bring multiple cups of milk just to pick a few and return the rest was annoying. Having to do it himself would have been better. Unfortunately, he couldn't be the one to grab the source liquids himself. Fortunately, Brian didn't seem to mind, at least, not yet. As Brian went to retrieve more spirit source liquids from a corner, Michael turned his focus inward, calling up his status screen. Status. Name, Michael Norman. Class, Necromancer Apprentice. Level 9. EXP, 112/2000. Strength, 7.3, 1.2 carat. Agility, 13.1, 2.0 carat. Constitution, 8.9, 1.2 carat. Intelligence, 34.3, 4.0 carat. Attribute points, 24. Skills, Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses. Talent, Infinite Evolution. Class Skill, Contract Slot, 10/18. Gift, Mark of Origin. He quickly navigated to the talent section, eager to confirm his progress. Talent, Infinite Evolution. Evolution points, 15. Evolvable. Lucky, Undead Verdant Wolf LV. 11. Insufficient evolution points. Can't be evolved. Prince, Undead Verdant Wolf LV. 11. Insufficient evolution points. Can't be evolved. Undead Forest Wolf LV. 5. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Undead Goblin LV. 5. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Since leaving the crack, Michael had gained another 4 evolution points. It might not seem like much, but it was significant. Just one more point would allow him to evolve a 3-star common rank Undead into a rare rank, and 2 more points could elevate a 1-star common rank creature to rare rank. 4 evolution points were a big deal. Michael was filled with happiness, yet it was tinged with frustration. The issue wasn't that he was reluctant to spend money now. It was that he didn't have enough. I still need to hunt more. Michael clenched his fists in determination, a glint of murderous intent flashing in his eyes. Anyway, Michael had already decided to apply for more crack entries after this. He couldn't help but sigh as his list of tasks continued to grow, evolving his undead, boosting their strength, and his own, to finally explore the land of origin, entering dimensional cracks to earn money, which was now essential for acquiring evolution points to further enhance his power. It all felt overwhelming, but Michael knew he had to tackle every single task. Ah, Lucky. Oh, Lucky. You guys better work harder so your dad can buy more drugs. Chapter 55 More Evolution Points. Evolving Lucky again. 1. Michael earned a total of $100,000 from selling the goblin corpses to the association. In truth, the actual amount was a few $100s less, but Brian had rounded it up to an even $100,000 for him. To this, Michael didn't feel particularly appreciative. A single goblin corpse sold for $1,000, so in reality, Michael had given the association at least twice the value of the amount he received. As such, Brian's gesture didn't mean much to him. When Brian returned, the two of them began the process of selecting spirit source liquids. Fortunately, Michael managed to secure 10 more evolution points just as Brian's patience wore thin, and he was ready to send him off. The purchases included 5 bottles he used earlier, costing $24,000 in total, 3 bottles at $3,500 each, and 2 at $7,000 each. Additionally, Michael spent $70,000 on 10 more bottles. By the time he was done, of the $100,000 he had earned today, only a little over $6,000 remained. Just like that, Michael went from being a rich youth to a near pauper. Worse still, from the way things were going, he doubted this pattern would change anytime soon. If anything, he suspected he'd only get poorer in the future. Another thing was that Michael didn't sell all the corpses he had on hand. He kept 15 of them to attempt reviving later. After saying his goodbyes to Brian, who responded with barely more civility than before, Michael made his way to the receptionist. She greeted him with a teasing smile. Following a brief discussion, Michael booked the next 2 days for a grueling schedule of entering and exiting dimensional cracks. Though he would have to spend much of this time working with other teams, making money and gaining experience points was important. Search the novelfire.net website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. As for the toll of his murderous intent, Michael admitted to himself that he wanted nothing more than to take a break, to stop killing, and to stay still for a while. But the reality of his situation didn't allow for that luxury. Dimensional cracks were his only way to progress now. Between the pressing issue of the land of origin and his lack of qualifications to enter an Awakener's Academy, Michael simply couldn't afford to take things slow. All he could do was hope for the best, move with the flow, and pray that everything would turn out fine in the end. After wrapping up his business with the association, Michael made his way out of the building. This time, He didn't hail a taxi, as he wasn't planning to head home. Instead, he turned his attention to finding a hotel nearby. It took a while, and by the time Michael finally booked a room, nearly an hour had passed since he'd left the association. The delay was partly because he wasn't just looking for a hotel close to the association, but one that also promised comfort. After a long day of killing, the last thing he wanted was to deal with two loud dogs making noise next door. He feared he might lose control and do something crazy. Admittedly, Michael could have found a hotel much faster if he'd used his phone, but it was dead. It was an old device, and since he had used it extensively in the Goblin World crack to check the time, it had run out of battery by the time he reached the association. Luckily, the hotel he chose had a room equipped with multiple charging cables, so Michael plugged in his phone as soon as he settled in. After a quick shower to refresh himself in the hotel bathroom, Michael connected his consciousness to the land of origin. In another world, a pair of green eyes opened. It was evening in the real world, but in the land of origin, it was noon. The abandoned dorms Michael inhabited still carried a faint stench from the corpses he had left there, but thankfully, the smell was beginning to fade. Before starting anything, Michael fed his body an energy supplement, the last one he had on hand. While this body didn't feel hunger, he figured it wouldn't be fair to let it starve. Conveniently, he ignored the fact that this body hadn't had real food in 3 days. After feeding himself, Michael eagerly brought out all 10 bottles of source liquid he had purchased from the association and began consuming them one by one. By the 5th bottle, Michael had grown used to the bitter taste, but his stomach churned, and he felt like throwing up. Of course, he didn't give in. With tears in his eyes, he forced himself to finish the remaining bottles. When he was finally done, Michael felt awful. Between the energy supplement and the 10 soul energy recovery potions, he wondered if he was starting to turn into a drug addict. But as he checked his talent section, a sly grin spread across his face. It's worth it. Talent, infinite evolution. Evolution points, 29. Evolvable. Lucky, Undead Verdant Wolf LV. 11. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Prince, Undead Verdant Wolf LV. 11. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Undead Forest Wolf LV. 5. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Undead Goblin LV. 5. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Michael was ecstatic at the sight of his increasing evolution points. If not for the fact that it costs so much to accumulate them this way, he would have preferred this method over the daily refresh of points. The next figures he saw beneath his total points made his heart race with excitement. Lucky, Undead Verdant Wolf LV. 11. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Prince, Undead Verdant Wolf LV. 11. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. I can evolve them. I can evolve them again. Chapter 56. More evolution points. Evolving Lucky again. 2. I can evolve them. I can evolve them again. SEO Arch the AvruElfire.net website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. It felt like suddenly receiving double happiness, which made Michael grin a lot. Michael had always wondered about the evolution patterns of his undead. Evolving Lucky from a 2-star forest wolf to a 3-star common rank forest wolf had consumed 1 evolution point. Then, evolving Lucky to a rare rank undead had consumed 5 evolution points. Beyond that, Michael had no clue how many evolution points would be required for higher levels. When his evolution points accumulated to 10, there was no sign of being able to evolve Lucky or Prince. Even when it reached 15 at the association, there was still no indication that his 2 rare rank undead could evolve further. Though Michael didn't dwell on it too much, it still weighed heavily on his mind. Evolving his undead was the fastest way for him to gain power, and since his undead were an extension of his strength, this also meant it was the quickest way for him to grow stronger. If his supposed shortcut to quick power turned out to be a long and arduous process, Michael couldn't help but feel a twinge of despair. However, the sight before him now reassured him a little. At least it didn't seem like evolving his rare rank undead again would require an absurd 100 evolution points. The question now was, how many evolution points did it require? Unfortunately, Michael hadn't been keeping track of his accumulated evolution points. If he had, He might have noticed the exact amount required when Lucky and Prince could evolve again. But since he hadn't done that, the quickest way to get his answer was simple. He had to evolve one of his undead again. Lucky, Michael called out excitedly. Calling out his undead's name wasn't necessary to summon them from the netherworld, but Michael was too thrilled to care. A greenish-black magic circle appeared in front of Michael, and his current favorite undead emerged from it. Unlike the last time, when it had immediately gone into a combat-ready state due to sensing its master's anxiety, Lucky seemed much more relaxed this time. It began to inspect its surroundings and quickly recognized the familiar place, the one with moss growing on the walls. With slightly bouncy steps, Lucky made its way to a section of the wall covered in moss and tore off a piece to chew on. A second later, it spat the moss out in confusion. Through the connection Michael shared with Lucky, he could vaguely understand its current thoughts. Why moss look tasty, but moss no have taste? Michael's mouth twitched as he watched. Lucky, come and stand in front of me, Michael said aloud. In fact, based on his previous experiments, Michael already knew it wasn't strictly necessary for his undead to be physically in front of him in order to evolve them. Though he hadn't figured out the exact range limit yet, he had a feeling that if his talent allowed it, he might be able to evolve any of his undead from a distance. Still, for now, he preferred to have them close by. This way he could observe their changes up close. Undead Verdant Wolf LV 11. Rank Rare. Evolved to Rare for 25 evolution points. 25 evolution points. Michael nearly screamed. He had expected the next evolution requirement to be at least 20, but the additional 5 points felt manageable, yet daunting. Reflecting on the previous evolution patterns, Michael noticed something. The first evolution required 1 point, and the next required 5 times that amount. Now, the same pattern seemed to hold true. 25 evolution points were 5 times the previous requirement. This realization made Michael's forehead break out in a sweat. It can't be. Though he knew it was likely the case, Michael couldn't help but groan. If each subsequent evolution required 5 times the previous amount, then evolving Lucky again would demand at least, exactly, 125 evolution points. Ugh, Michael groaned in frustration. Even if he managed to fill all his contract slots by reaching level 10, giving him 20 undead and generating 21 evolution points per day, it would still take him 6 days to accumulate the required 125 points. While 6 days wasn't an unbearably long time, especially if he wasn't in a rush, Michael couldn't help but feel greedy for faster progress. At least he had uncovered a pattern. The next step was clear. Evolution points. Show me your limit. Evolve. Once again, a bright light emitted from Lucky's body, assaulting Michael's eyes. However, just like before, he made sure to observe the changes occurring to his undead. Lucky let out a howl of pain, and Michael felt a pang of guilt, his chest tightening slightly. Lucky, you must know I'm doing this for your good, he reassured, as much for himself as for his companion. Yes, it was definitely for Lucky's benefit, nothing else. The light grew brighter, and Michael watched as his undead's body expanded, becoming bulkier and larger until it reached an imposing height of 3 meters before finally stopping. Fortunately, I can dismiss you back to the netherworld, Michael muttered with slight relief. Otherwise, it'd be a challenge to manage you at this size, big guy. He waited with growing anticipation for the light surrounding Lucky to fade. When it finally dimmed, Michael got a clear view of his undead's new appearance. Lucky now towered at 3 meters tall, stretched about 4 meters in length, and was roughly 2 meters wide. Its presence was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, exuding an intimidating yet strangely captivating aura of primal beauty. Its skin retained its grayish-green hue, but was now adorned with striking red spots scattered across its body. Around its neck, a mane of brown vine-like growths with crimson-tipped ends had sprouted, giving it an even more feral and majestic appearance. Above all else, Lucky radiated a dangerous aura that sent chills down Michael's spine, though it also filled him with pride and excitement. Even Michael couldn't tell exactly how strong his undead had become. It was already powerful before, but now it felt overwhelmingly so. Before he could pull up Lucky's profile to check its updated stats, several panels of information materialized in front of him. Your rare Undead Verdant Wolf has evolved to rare Undead Redthorn Wolf. Your Undead Redthorn Wolf has gained the skill Poison. Your Undead Redthorn Wolf Plant Control skill has advanced to Intermediate Mastery. Michael saw the new rank of his Undead, and the grin on his face widened further. Spending 25 evolution points had not only increased Lucky's star rating, but also elevated it to 3 stars. Michael had always suspected that evolution didn't simply increase a star rating, but instead progressed the undead to the start of a new rank, reaching the upper limit of that rank before advancing further. However, he couldn't jump to conclusions just yet, not until he tested it by evolving one of the 1-star common goblin undead he had. What caught Michael off guard, though, was the new skill Lucky had gained. Not only had Lucky changed race again, but it also gained another racial skill, a particularly vicious one at that. Michael glanced at his undead, who was now eyeing the moss on the wall in front of it, seemingly debating whether to eat it or not. Michael decided not to call it back. With such an innocent demeanor, there was no need to worry about Lucky suddenly poisoning him. Aside from gaining a new skill, Lucky's previous ability, Plant Control, had advanced in mastery, delivering yet another dose of joy to Michael. But what made him the happiest was when he checked Lucky's profile panel and saw its new level. Redthorn Wolf LV, 18. Name, Lucky. EXP, 0/59, 800. Rank, Rare. Skills, Bite, Plant Control, Poison New. Master, Michael Norman. Evolving his undead truly made them stronger, but Michael hadn't expected it to be this strong. Level 18. A whole 7-level increase. What made this even more impactful was the looming presence of the bigger problem outside this abandoned dorm. The Gargoyle, a level 21 monster. It was now only 3 levels above Lucky. Michael couldn't help but think, was there a chance, a good enough chance, that he could take the initiative to attack now? Plant Control, Intermediate Mastery, Proficiency, 14.2%. A racial ability of the Redthorn Wolf species. Plant Control allowed them to manipulate plants within their surroundings and use mana to influence growth or movement. At its current mastery, the skill had a range of 100 meters. Poison, Basic Mastery, Proficiency, 7.5%. A racial ability of the Redthorn Wolf species. Poison enables the wolf to secrete a potent toxin through the thorned mane around its head. When the thorns make contact with a target, the poison spreads into their system, causing progressive weakening and damage over time. At its current mastery, the poison has limited potency, causing minor damage and reducing the target's mobility slightly. The toxin's effect lasts for 10 seconds and can only be inflicted at close range, requiring direct contact with the thorn mane. Chapter 57 Thoughts. 10 chapters mass release tomorrow. Was there a chance he could take the initiative to attack now? Michael couldn't help but entertain the thought after seeing Lucky's new level. Both were rare rank creatures, with the main difference being a 3-level gap. From personal experience, Michael knew levels didn't mean everything. Since they were both of the same rank, the Gargoyle should only pose a troublesome challenge for Lucky, but defeating him outright would likely require it to be exceptionally powerful or particularly special among 3-star rare rank species. It's not impossible to act now, Michael reasoned, but there are still many factors to consider. For one, the Gargoyle might not be the only monster beyond the door. If I attract another creature allied with it, Lucky could probably escape alone, but I wouldn't stand a chance. Moreover, Lucky might not necessarily be a match for the Gargoyle yet. Taking the initiative would mean sacrificing the time I need to prepare, and right now, preparation is my biggest advantage. Just to be safe, I should have at least 2 more undead as powerful as Lucky. That way, victory would be far more achievable, and we'd have backup for any surprises. Michael thought it over carefully and ultimately decided to wait. The risks were still too great, and dying without claiming a single reward from these ruins after so many days of effort was an outcome he would regret for years. It was better to play it safe and wait a little longer, at most 3 more days. In that time, by selling corpses to earn money for more source liquids, he might even be able to evolve more than 2 undead to Lucky's current level. In a way, Michael felt a twinge of jealousy toward his undead. Their ability to grow stronger so quickly through evolution was enviable. If he could do the same, He wouldn't just be confident about qualifying for the Academy entrance exams 3 months from now. He'd be wondering if he might already be too powerful. After making his decision, Michael proceeded to check Lucky's newly updated status profile. Redthorn Wolf LV, 18. Name, Lucky. EXP, 0/59, 800. Rank, Rare. Skills, Bite, Plant Control, Poison New. Master, Michael Norman. Aside from the new race and level that had first caught his attention, the next thing Michael noticed was the experience points, which made him break into a sweat. Almost 60,000 experience points. If I were to kill goblins that give at least 45 EXP per kill, I need to kill at least 1,300 of them just to gain a single level. And that's just for one level after so many already, he thought grimly. Unless I find a place teeming with nothing but monsters to slaughter all day, leveling up at this stage isn't something that can realistically be done in a day. Thankfully, he only needed evolution points to strengthen his undead, making their progression more manageable. As for himself, Michael resolved to do what he could within his current limitations. For now, that meant entering more cracks and preparing to finally explore the land of origin. The real world had strict restrictions on hunting, though the benefit was that the monsters there were renewable. However, this didn't make leveling up any faster. Worse, since his member level wasn't high enough, he couldn't hunt stronger monsters freely in the real world. That wouldn't be an issue in the land of origin, though. Michael knew that if he specifically targeted stronger monsters and ensured Lucky or his other undead helped him land the finishing blow, the multiplier for defeating stronger creatures would significantly boost his EXP gain. This strategy gave him hope that reaching rank 2 within 3 months was still possible. Of course, if Michael could come up with this plan, other Awakeners in a similar situation might think of it too. But few would have the resources to execute it. Fortunately for Michael, he had his unique talent, and he intended to make full use of it. Michael then moved on to check Lucky's skill section. At the moment, Lucky only had 2 skills: Plant Control and Poison. While the number was low, both skills were highly practical. Plant Control could be utilized in a variety of ways, and thanks to Lucky's recent evolution, the skill's mastery level had improved significantly. The range had also increased from 10 meters to 100 meters, greatly enhancing its utility. Meanwhile, Poison added diversity to Lucky's attacks. However, the skill's description was somewhat vague, and Michael would need to test it out to determine the strength and effectiveness of its effects. Overall, Lucky's evolution had undoubtedly made him stronger than before. Michael couldn't quantify exactly how much stronger, but just standing near Lucky now gave him a sense of security. Shifting his focus away from Lucky, Michael turned his attention back to his talent section. Talent: Infinite Evolution. Evolution points: 4. Evolvable. Lucky, Undead Redthorn Wolf LV. 18. Insufficient evolution points. Can't be evolved. Prince, Undead Verdant Wolf LV. 11. Insufficient evolution points. Can't be evolved. Undead Forest Wolf LV. 5. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Undead Goblin LV. 5. Sufficient evolution points. Can be evolved. Michael looked at his accumulated evolution points and couldn't help but shake his head. I'm broke again. To think there would come a day when money was no longer his only measure of wealth. Michael had never imagined such a thing could happen. He also couldn't help but see the association as an incredibly stingy organization. One of his earlier motivations for wanting to get stronger was the monthly stipend of $15,000 they offered. I was truly blind, he thought with a bitter laugh. That amount couldn't even buy him 5 evolution points, a sum he could easily earn by entering a crack and hunting monsters. Though he still had enough evolution points to upgrade a few of his undead, Michael decided not to rush. As a level 9 necromancer, he had 18 contract slots, with 8 of them still open. He wanted to fill them now rather than leave the task for later, which would only make it more of a hassle. Michael also planned to start another round of using undead summoning, which would likely force him to invest attribute points into his intelligence stat. The skill itself was little more than a scam in his eyes, but for now he had no choice but to rely on it until he gained access to better alternatives, like rituals. He decided to prioritize evolving monsters he could summon and dismiss at will. That way, Even if they became too large as a result of evolution, it wouldn't be a problem. Of course, his second baby, Prince, took top priority. Hopefully, it wouldn't take too much time to successfully transfer Prince into the netherworld. No, Michael thought with conviction, he'd rather spend extra time to ensure success than having the skill fail at the end of the day. By the time Michael was done finalizing his plans, more than 2 hours had passed, and the land of origin was already blanketed in darkness, and Michael had no choice but to call it a day. Status: Name: Michael Norman. Class: Necromancer Apprentice. SE of the novel. F. IRD NUT website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. Level 9. EXP 112/2000. Strength 7.3. Agility 13.1. Constitution 8.9. Intelligence 45.3, 11.0 carat. Attribute points 13. Skills: Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses. Talent: Infinite Evolution. Class skill: Contract slot 18/18. Gift: Mark of Origin. In the end, Undead Summoning did require Michael to spend some of his attribute points, though this was largely because he had used the skill multiple times on Prince. Fortunately, his efforts paid off, and Prince was successfully summoned. He also managed to bring 6 more undead into the netherworld. One of them was the third wolf that had come along with Lucky and Prince, while the others were all goblins. With that, his contract slots were now completely filled, and he had only used 12 out of the 15 corpses he'd prepared. However, he hadn't evolved any of them yet. By the end of the process, Michael was utterly exhausted. A terrible headache also assaulted him. Apparently, physical exhaustion was far better than mana exhaustion. The latter wasn't just physically taxing, but also mentally draining, and Michael would argue that the mental toll was far worse. The feeling of not gaining a new skill when his intelligence reached 40 points also made his mood a little terrible, though he had expected something like this to happen. After returning to the real world, Michael didn't even bother to fight the sleep that tugged at his eyes. He simply fell asleep. Evolution routes. Forest Wolf. Forest Wolf, common rank, 1 to 3 stars. Verdant Wolf, rare rank, 1-star species. Redthorn Wolf, rare rank, 3-star species. Goblin. Goblin, common rank, 1-star monster. Poison, basic mastery, proficiency, 7.5%. A racial ability of the Redthorn Wolf species. Poison enables the wolf to secrete a potent toxin through the thorned mane around its head. When the thorns make contact with a target, the poison spreads into their system, causing progressive weakening and damage over time. At its current mastery, the poison has limited potency, causing minor damage and reducing the target's mobility slightly. The toxin's effect lasts for 10 seconds and can only be inflicted at close range, requiring direct contact with the thorned mane. Chapter 58, Spearmanship, 1 out of 10. Michael woke up the next morning feeling refreshed. The lights of the hotel room were on, just as he had left them, thankfully, but the window covers were drawn tightly, concealing whatever lay beyond. Though the thick covers obscured the view, Michael could tell the sun had yet to rise. After stretching a little in bed, he got up and reached for his phone. It had been charging for hours and was now fully charged. Disconnecting it, he checked the time. 3:49 a.m. I woke up pretty early, he murmured. The last time he'd passed out from mana exhaustion, he'd slept in until 9. It seemed the stronger he grew, or rather, the higher his stats climbed, the more efficiently his body could recover. This realization brought a smile to Michael's face. At least this way, he'd have more time to get things done. Oddly enough, Michael's first action wasn't to take a bath or freshen up. Instead, he returned to bed, phone in hand, and logged into the Supers Association forum. Yesterday, he hadn't had the chance to browse, but Brian's suggestion about acquiring a manual lingered in his mind. It was time to cross that off his list. Heading directly to the stores section of the forum, Michael typed Spear Manual into the search bar. A flood of results appeared. However, he had forgotten to include the word basic in his search, and the results were far from beginner-friendly. Instead, a list of illustrious and advanced manuals filled his screen. The Art of the Thrust, a treatise on spearcraft and strategy. Piercing the Veil, Mastery of the Spear in Combat and Form. The Iron Fang Codex, Secrets of Spear Warfare. Dancing with Shadows, The Elegance of the Spear. The Eternal Point, A Spearman's Guide to Precision and Power. From Ash to Steel, the definitive manual of spear techniques. Curiosity got the better of him, and he tapped on a few to learn more about them. The Art of the Thrust, a treatise on spearcraft and strategy. Fundamentals of spear handling, thrusting, and parrying. Strategies for using the spear in formation and single combat. Lessons on adapting to different terrains and opponents. Piercing the Veil, Mastery of the Spear in Combat and Form. Advanced techniques for precision strikes and feints. Combat stances and fluid movements for offensive and defensive maneuvers. Philosophical insights into the discipline and mental focus required for mastery. The Iron Fang Codex, Secrets of Spear Warfare. Close-quarter techniques and counters for swords and shields. Effective use of the spear in mounted combat. Maintenance and customization of spears for maximum effectiveness. After browsing through the descriptions of the first few manuals from the search results, Michael had only one thought for all of them. Really fancy. Of course, they were undoubtedly impressive. Michael could tell from their descriptions that they were also highly practical. Had he not received Brian's advice yesterday, he might have been tempted to drool over them. But he knew better now. Though these manuals were meant to teach, it was clear they were designed for people who already had some foundation in spearcraft. Michael? He had nothing. The fact that spearmanship didn't even appear in the skills section of his panel was proof enough. These types of manuals weren't for him. Instead of speeding up his training with the spear, they'd only serve to distract someone like him, who still needed to master the basics of handling one. Shaking his head, Michael redirected his focus back to the search bar. This time, he made sure to add the word basic to his query before hitting search. A new list of results popped up almost immediately. The Point and the Pole, Beginner's Guide to Spearmanship. Steps of the Spear, Learning the First Forms. Straight as an Arrow, Spear Basics for Young Warriors. SEO Arch the Novel Fireton. T website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. The Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals. Hold the Line, Foundations of Spear Wall Tactics. Just from the names of the manuals alone, it was clear these were meant for beginners like Michael. As he did with the fancy manuals earlier, Michael went through the details of a few top results. The Point and the Pole, Beginner's Guide to Spearmanship. A straightforward manual covering basic grips, stances, thrusts, and spear maintenance. Perfect for first-time users. Steps of the Spear, Learning the First Forms. Focuses on footwork, stability, and basic sparring techniques with an introduction to foundational combat forms. Straight as an Arrow, Spear Basics for Young Warriors. A beginner-friendly guide designed for younger or less experienced warriors, featuring simple drills and safety tips. The Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals. A comprehensive look at the basics, including defensive techniques, spear anatomy, and positioning in group combat. Hold the Line, Foundations of Spear Wall Tactics. Specialized for teamwork, this manual teaches the essentials of forming and maintaining effective spear walls in battle. After a moment of thought, Michael decided to buy all 5. After all, Brian had never specified how many manuals he should purchase, only that he needed something to help him with the basics of spearmanship. Besides, Michael's interest was primarily self-defense, so he'd likely focus on one manual while taking references from the others. Moments later, Michael watched as more than $5,000 disappeared from his account yet again. As expected, I can only be broke, not rich, he muttered. Even the PDF versions of the manuals were pricey. If he'd opted for physical copies, he'd probably be in debt by now. Sighing, Michael decided to start reading while it was still early. He opened The Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals, as it felt more like a book he could study without requiring immediate physical practice. He had only intended to read a little, but before he knew it, morning had come. Even the thick curtains of the hotel room couldn't fully block out the sunlight streaming in. And that wasn't all. You have understood the basic essence of spearmanship and gained the skill spearmanship. Spearmanship, basic mastery, proficiency, 2%. A fundamental skill for wielders of the spear, Spearmanship improves the user's control, balance, and precision with this versatile weapon. It focuses on the physical mechanics and practical understanding of spear handling, making it easier to execute basic techniques. At its current mastery level, the skill grants increased handling. The spear feels lighter and more balanced in the user's grip, reducing fatigue during prolonged use. Steady strikes. Thrusting and sweeping motions are smoother, with a slight boost to accuracy and follow-through. Beginner's insight. Basic flaws in stance or grip are easier to recognize and correct, improving overall combat readiness. This works too. Chapter 59 Goblin Evolution, Hobgoblin, 2 out of 10. Though Michael felt he now had more knowledge about spears and how to use them, it was still just knowledge. It didn't mean he suddenly knew how to apply it. That was why the notification about gaining the spearmanship skill caught him completely by surprise. No, this should be expected, Michael murmured. He recalled reading on the forum, and even in some of his skill descriptions, that understanding a skill could influence how it was used. Looking at it from this perspective, it made sense that knowing more about something could grant one the ability to acquire a skill. However, this clearly required either a vast amount of knowledge or exceptional comprehension. Between the two, Michael could only assume he possessed great comprehension, though his grades in school would strongly disagree. In the end, he chalked it up to luck. It could also be that spearmanship was a relatively simple skill to pick up, making it easier to acquire related abilities. Michael thought back to how he had quickly gained the basic shot skill after firing a gun only a few times. Perhaps this was a similar case. But if that were true, how could he explain spending hours using a spear in the goblin world and not gaining a skill back then? Ultimately, Michael realized he didn't know enough about how these things worked. After thinking about it briefly, he decided to let it go. Looking at the bright light filtering through the thick curtains, Michael instinctively checked the time on his phone. 8:42 a.m. It's this late already? Michael exclaimed. CTHONOVROLFIR.net website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. When had he ever enjoyed studying so much? Several thoughts passed through his mind as he got out of bed. It was daytime now, which meant it should be a little lighter in the land of origin, where time ran 3 hours behind the real world. In a place as unfamiliar as the dorm his other body resided in, Michael didn't feel comfortable performing any major activities while it was still dark. That was why, when he woke up earlier, he hadn't considered evolving his undead with the points he'd accumulated. It wasn't suitable to do that here in the hotel either, where he was surrounded by ordinary people. He had no choice but to wait. Now, with conditions likely more favorable in the land of origin, Michael got into a comfortable position on the bed and connected his consciousness to his other body. Michael felt his vision shift, and once again, he was back in the land of origin. Having traveled between the two worlds several times now, he was beginning to settle into the routine of switching. So far, there hadn't been any significant issues, but only time would tell what would happen when both versions of him started living completely separate lives. Even now, despite having barely started anything in the land of origin, he already felt a growing sense of detachment from everything. Worst of all, even from his family. The land of origin was still shrouded in darkness. Being in an enclosed space only made it seem darker than what little Michael could glimpse of the outside world. Still, thanks to his enhanced eyesight, he could see reasonably well. While there didn't appear to be any immediate danger in staying where he was, Michael wasn't one to take unnecessary risks. He summoned Prince and Lucky out of the netherworld to stand guard. Then, he selected a random level 5 undead goblin from the group he had previously captured in the netherworld. Coincidentally, every monster Michael had ever turned into an undead shared a common trait: green skin, which became a dull grayish hue after being reanimated. The goblin standing in front of him was no exception. It stood at around 2.8 to 3 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms, short legs, and a twisted, grotesque face resembling that of a deformed, elderly human. In comparison to the goblins, forest wolves were much more pleasant to look at. "I hope you look a little better after evolving," Michael muttered to the undead goblin. Its weak strength and low species rank didn't inspire much confidence. Of course, he wasn't expecting a reply or even a reaction, so before the thought could linger, Michael began using his talent on the undead goblin. Undead Goblin LV5. Rank, Common. Evolved to Common for 1 evolution point. Michael wasn't surprised to see an evolution point take an Undead directly to 3 stars instead of 2 stars, which was the next level above, because he had already considered the possibility. Still, it felt satisfying to have his theory confirmed. What this essentially meant was that his evolution points didn't simply increase an Undead's power incrementally. They either gave them an entirely new rank, pushed them to the peak of that rank, and then repeated the process. It was great to know there were no hidden obstacles. The light radiating from the goblin's body slowly dimmed, revealing its transformed figure. Standing at 4 feet tall, a grayish-green monster now stood before Michael. Its race changed. Michael muttered, slightly surprised but quick to understand. He had initially expected a situation similar to the forest wolves, where a race change only occurred when they ranked up. But evidently, goblins had far lower innate potential compared to wolves, making their evolution path less restrictive. Undead Hobgoblin LV6. Rank, Common. Its level increased, but unlike the excitement Michael had felt when his forest wolves, Lucky, and Prince evolved to 3-star Common rank Undead, he couldn't muster the same enthusiasm this time. Unless it was a rare rank form, it seemed hard for him to feel truly excited. That said, the Hobgoblin's new appearance was certainly something to behold. Evolution routes. Forest Wolf. Forest Wolf, Common rank, 1 to 3 stars. Verdant Wolf, Rare rank, 1-star species. Redthorn Wolf, Rare rank, 3-star species. Goblin. Goblin, Common rank, 1-star monster. Hobgoblin, Common rank, 3-star monster. Chapter 60 Waiting and Training, March 10th. Goblins were truly ugly, and even if they were part of Michael's undead army, that didn't mean he would deny it out of camaraderie. It wasn't to the extent that one would vomit at first sight, but they pretty much fit the image of the monsters told in stories to scare children into behaving. However, the Hobgoblin was a little different. It was taller, for one, resembling an early human teenager. Its previously long arms now looked proportional, and its legs, which had been abnormally short, appeared normal. At first glance, it could almost pass as a lanky teenage human of its height. But these were just minor changes. Yes, minor changes. What truly took Michael aback was its face. It was still ugly, but compared to before, it seemed almost handsome. Michael squinted his eyes, observing the undead more closely. It was indeed a little handsome, but it seemed shrouded in a faint layer of ugliness. Its face now bore a closer resemblance to a human's compared to its twisted goblin form. It felt like each evolution was steadily refining the goblin's appearance. Michael couldn't shake the suspicion that he'd be in for a major surprise if he evolved one more time. Well, I'll find out after my daily points refresh, Michael thought. Since this goblin had already evolved once, he only needed 5 more points to evolve it again. Even if he didn't take more source liquids today, his regular daily evolution points should suffice. Michael named the Hobgoblin Beginning due to it being the first of its kind under him to be evolved. Since he still had 3 evolution points left, Michael used them on his other summons. He evolved the 3rd Undead Wolf he had to 3-star Common rank Undead, and evolved 2 more goblins into Hobgoblins. Seeing how they started to look slightly more attractive after evolving, Michael couldn't help but anticipate what future evolutions would bring. SEO Arch the Nefired et website on Google to access chapters of novels early and in the highest quality. This curiosity was especially strong because he had deliberately evolved a female goblin to see if there would be any differences. To his surprise, the female goblin's appearance shifted even further toward a human-like form. She still looked ugly, but there was a strange illusion that another evolution might result in something unimaginable. Right now, she resembled a human preteen. After thinking about it for a moment, Michael decided to name her Lily. Why Lily? It was his younger cousin's name, and he thought it was a funny joke, one that, unfortunately, only he could appreciate. It would be nice to have some humanoid undead around me. It would be even better if they could talk too. Don't look at me like that. Lucky, you know I love you. It was still quite early, and Michael found himself wondering what to do. If not for the fact that cracks had restrictions, he would have entered one the moment he woke up. Unfortunately, he'd have to wait until 11 a.m. in the real world to join a team and enter a crack, which was still about 2 hours away. Feeling restless and uncomfortable doing nothing, Michael considered whether he should give cultivation another try and see if there had been any changes when this thought reminded him of the skill he had awakened earlier. Spearmanship, Basic Mastery, Proficiency, 2%. A fundamental skill for wielders of the spear, spearmanship improves the user's control, balance, and precision with this versatile weapon. It focuses on the physical mechanics and practical understanding of spear handling, making it easier to execute basic techniques. At its current mastery level, the skill grants increased handling. The spear feels lighter and more balanced in the user's grip, reducing fatigue during prolonged use. Steady strikes. Thrusting and sweeping motions are smoother, with a slight boost to accuracy and follow-through. Beginner's insight. Basic flaws in stance or grip are easier to recognize and correct, improving overall combat readiness. This was the first weapon-focused skill Michael had awakened since becoming an Awakener, even though it had only been barely 3 days. Though he had no intention of abandoning the path of a mage to become a close combat fighter, he still wanted to take this skill seriously. In the future, if he ever faced a mage in a situation where neither party could use their magical abilities, it would be their close combat skills that would set them apart. The space around him was wide and visible, making it a suitable place to practice. Michael dismissed all his undead aside from Lucky and Prince, then retrieved his spear from his storage space. Since spearmanship seemed to be a passive skill that didn't require conscious activation, Michael immediately got to work practicing. Following the basic moves outlined in the PDF of The Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals, he had read earlier, Michael carefully practiced each movement while adhering to the instructions in the manual. As he continued, he began to feel his handling of the spear improving. He knew this was the skill's effect kicking in. Just like with his other skills, there was an almost innate awareness guiding him, letting him know what he should be doing as he moved the spear. His prior knowledge from reading The Spearman's Handbook, Volume 1, Fundamentals, also seemed to accelerate his progress. Spearmanship proved to be also highly adaptable, guiding him in the right direction while staying consistent with the movements described in the manual. After moving and practicing for around 20 minutes, Michael called out his skill panel to check his progress. Spearmanship, Basic Mastery, Proficiency, 3%. A 1% increase. It wasn't that the amount was small, it was actually higher than he had expected. Seeing his progress in real time sparked something within Michael. Some people didn't fear hardship, they feared hardship without progress. But if those same people had a clear indicator of their success, like Michael was currently experiencing, they would only work harder. Michael was no exception. Fueled by this newfound determination, Michael gripped his spear with renewed focus and started practicing again with burning resolve. Compared to waiting around and doing nothing, this was the best way to spend his time. Chapter 61, Progressing Strength. To the Association, 4 out of 10. For the next hour, Michael did nothing in the land of origin but practice. He never knew practicing could be so enjoyable. Back in school, their physical education classes had focused on close combat tactics and fitness. This was why Michael could at least use spearmanship in the first place. But no one really loved physical education. To most, it was just a way for the school to keep them fit. Sure, there was a chance students could become cultivators, or, even more rarely, awaken, professions tied to physical prowess, so the class wasn't unneeded. Yet, the class itself wasn't enjoyable. It felt more like a chore to pass, just like most other subjects, except food and nutrition. Or maybe it wasn't that the classes were boring. It was just that, back then, everyone practiced for long periods without knowing if they were progressing. Most of the time, they felt stagnant. Now, however, Michael could detect even the slightest progress. The feeling of grinding a skill was beyond words. Spearmanship, Basic Mastery, Proficiency, 6.5%. Michael didn't know why, but it felt easier to level up this skill compared to some of his others. Perhaps it was because some of his skills were at Intermediate Mastery, a level higher than Basic Mastery, where the gap in progress felt vast. Even other skills at Basic Mastery, like Basic Shot, barely had a proficiency above 1%. Regardless of the reason, Michael was thrilled to see himself improving. After an hour and a half of training, he still felt full of energy. If anything, It seemed like the session had merely warmed him up and left him feeling great. Unfortunately, while he'd have loved to keep training and raising his proficiency, there were other things he needed to do. It should be close to 11 now, Michael thought, as he put his spear back into his storage space and moved to sit at the side of the room. He dismissed Lucky and Prince back to the netherworld and summoned his third forest wolf alongside a few other undead goblins to guard him. These goblins were ones he hadn't managed to store in the netherworld yet and had to keep in his storage space instead. For now, though he identified as a horde-type necromancer, Michael clearly favored quality over quantity most of the time, at least until he gained more evolution points to strengthen his undead and expand the netherworld's capacity. To the outside world, Michael would most likely be seen as a necromancer who valued quality over quantity, or at least, that's what people would think they saw as undead. With his precautions set, Michael connected his consciousness back to his body in the real world. He got out of bed and stretched, feeling his body. It felt slightly uncomfortable. Having a good warm-up really does make a difference. Unfortunately, he couldn't practice in the cramped space of his hotel room, nor did he have the time. It was currently 7 minutes after 10. Great, I still have an hour to get ready. Thanks to the receptionist's efforts yesterday, who helped him contact teams with reservations for crack exploration to see if they needed an extra teammate, Michael had managed to secure bookings for the next 2 days. His first appointment was in an hour, where he would meet the team that agreed to take him on. If everything went smoothly, they'd head straight into a crack. Michael took this seriously. He needed the money to buy items that would grant him more evolution points. He also needed to reach the max level in the unranked stage and prepare for his advancement to rank 1, bringing him closer to his ultimate goal of rank 2. Though he felt uncomfortable with how his real-world body wasn't as warmed up as his body in the land of origin, he could only ignore the sensation and get dressed. The hotel provided toothpaste, but Michael had forgotten to buy a toothbrush. He made do with the only option he had, using his finger. It was uncomfortable, and he still didn't feel like his mouth was properly clean. I need to buy mints after leaving the hotel, he reminded himself. Speaking of clothes, the ones he had on hand were still the old set that old man Lou had given him. He'd already decided yesterday to get some new clothing before heading into a crack. Fortunately, there was a mall nearby, close to both the hotel and the association branch, so it wouldn't take much time. After freshening up and putting on the same clothes he'd worn the previous day, Michael made his way out of the hotel. He stopped by the mall to get the items he needed and then headed straight to the association. By the time he arrived at the association building, it was 2 minutes to 11. He had barely avoided being late. While being a little late wouldn't have been a huge issue, Michael knew it wasn't his place to take that risk. If anyone could afford to be late, it was the team he was tagging along with, not him. After all, he needed them far more than they needed him, except he was willing to wait. Upon entering the association, Michael made his way to the familiar receptionist whose counter was currently empty. As he walked over, he couldn't help but wonder if this lady ever took a day off. He hadn't paid much attention to the other staff in the building, so he wouldn't have noticed if someone else was absent or working in shifts. However, seeing this woman at work for 3 days in a row was a different level of dedication. Back on Earth, this would be called the grind. Finally reaching her counter, Michael was just about to greet her when she turned to look at him. Mr. Norman? By now, she had already memorized his name. Seems like you managed to arrive at the same time as your team, she added, her eyes lingering on something behind him. Confused, Michael turned to look over his shoulder to see who his team was, and the familiar faces behind him left him momentarily speechless. Chapter 62, Familiar Faces, 5 out of 10. 2 girls stood behind Michael, and they were familiar. Not people he knew personally, but ones he could claim a shared connection with. Schoolmates. Yes, Michael's teammates turned out to be the 2 girls who had awakened alongside him in class, along with the genius knight, Brian Lien. Michael didn't know the name of one of the girls, but he recognized the other, Lillian Stone. Though they'd never interacted directly, she had left an impression on him. Despite everything that had happened since then, it had only been 3 or 4 days since their awakening ceremony, and his memory of Lillian was still fresh. Why? Because during the ceremony, she was the first to be chosen and the first to awaken. If that was luck, it was a peculiar kind of luck. However, after his initial surprise, Michael quickly regained his composure. He didn't know their reasons for entering a crack, but it wasn't exactly strange to encounter them. They were all members of the same association, lived in the same region, and had awakened supernatural abilities. In a way, it was inevitable that their paths would cross. It just happened a bit sooner than expected. "Hi," Michael began, choosing to introduce himself first. "I'm going to be your teammate today." He extended a hand toward the girl who had arrived with Lillian since she was standing closer. With his oversized clothes, Michael gave off a sunny and approachable vibe, but as the girls stepped closer, they felt something off. A faint chill hung in the air around him, subtle but impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the physical temperature. It felt slightly gloomy, almost threatening. "I'm Mira, your teammate," the girl said, hesitating briefly before reaching out to shake Michael's hand. The moment their hands met, Mira flinched and pulled back quickly. His hand was ice cold. Michael noticed her reaction but chose not to dwell on it. What he didn't realize was that his class wasn't just a source of power, it also defined him in ways he hadn't yet come to understand. Classes didn't just shape abilities, they influenced identities. As a weak, budding necromancer, Michael remained unaware of this truth. In time, though, the question would arise. Would Michael maintain his sunny disposition or fully embrace the darker traits that came with his chosen path? Even now, his subconscious was showing signs of adaptation. Not everyone would feel comfortable around corpses, but to Michael, they already felt like essential resources, ones he didn't yet have enough of. Turning to Lillian, Michael extended his hand again. "Hi Lillian, I'm Michael. You recognize me?" Lillian asked as she hesitantly shook his hand. "You expected me not to?" "And no," she stammered, quickly withdrawing her hand and falling silent. She seems difficult to converse with, Michael thought, noting her reserved demeanor. He, too, wasn't someone who enjoyed talking unless necessary, but now he had to make an effort. Building some rapport with his teammates was important, not just for teamwork, but for achieving his goals. More than anything, Michael was eager to get into the crack and accomplish what mattered most, getting stronger. And if some money came along with that, well, all the better. Though brief, the three had already grown somewhat familiar with one another. After Mira, the team's designated leader on paper, accepted the application document from the receptionist, they made their way out of the association building. Once outside, they didn't immediately hail a ride. Instead, they gathered under the shade of a nearby tree to discuss their plans. "We're going to a corrupted-type crack, Ape region," Mira began. "Isn't this the Level 2 crack?" Michael interrupted, unable to hide his surprise at the familiar name. Yesterday, when he had asked the receptionist to help him join teams with reserved crack schedules in Woodstone City, he hadn't asked for the specifics of which cracks he'd be entering. However, he was able to know their names. But it was just this. Aside from that, he knew nothing more. It was a risky decision, but Michael wasn't the type to shy away from calculated risks now. While cautious by nature, he wasn't a coward. He had confidence in his strength, or rather, in the strength of his undead companions, Lucky and Prince. With the two of them by his side, Michael felt that, short of something completely overwhelming, he could handle himself. And if there was something so dangerous it could still harm him, well, that was no longer his problem. It was the world against him. Noticing his reaction, Mira frowned slightly. "Is something the matter?" she asked cautiously. "QA." Mira was usually nonchalant about most things, but something about Michael kept her on edge. It wasn't something she could easily explain, but her instincts told her to stay on guard around him. Unfortunately, her feelings alone weren't a valid reason to dismiss him. Besides, Mira wasn't the type to act purely on emotion. At least Michael wasn't a complete stranger. As schoolmates, there was a faint sense of familiarity, even if they hadn't interacted much before. Interestingly, Mira and Lillian weren't initially acquaintances either. The two only got to know each other after chatting a few times in the class group chat Brian had added them to. Unlike Brian, who had started his journey near a village with access to quests and an abundance of low-level monsters to hunt in the nearby forest, Mira and Lillian had been unlucky. One of them had been transported to a barren desert, while the other found herself on a desolate, abandoned island. Both situations were miserable in their own ways, and neither provided an ideal starting point. Having struggled through their misfortunes, they decided to try hunting monsters in dimensional cracks. Yesterday had been their first attempt, and they had barely made it out alive. Since they hadn't leveled up yet, they were barely different from ordinary humans without considering their skills. However, a level 2 crack was a bit too much for them now. Realizing they needed more support, they decided to reach out to Brian for help. However, just as they were making plans to contact him, Mira received a call from the association asking if her team needed another member. As the registered leader of their group, Mira accepted, reasoning that whoever joined couldn't possibly be worse off than they were. To be honest, Mira hadn't been too thrilled about the idea of working with Brian again. Lillian felt the same. Though Brian's fame as a genius knight had painted him as a reliable ally, their interactions with him revealed something unsettling. He was overly enthusiastic, almost unnervingly so. They didn't know what it was about him, but something was differently off. Chapter 63, Knowing More About Themselves, June 10th. Author's note. Good day, readers. The previous chapter, this one, and the upcoming chapters are all being rewritten. I wasn't satisfied with how they turned out, and I felt that continuing as they were might ruin the story. As a result, I had to take some time to replan. I apologize for any inconvenience this may have caused. Thank you for your understanding, and I hope you enjoy reading. P.S. All the chapters needed to be rewritten have been edited. Of course, Michael had no idea about the predicament of the two girls. If he knew, he might have even called them lucky. Had he not realized his initial location was within highly valuable ruins, he might have wanted to trade places with them. Though perhaps not with the one stranded on an island in the middle of nowhere. But the desert? He would have gladly taken that instead. Compared to being guarded by a former rank 2 monster, a creature so powerful that even strong rank 1 awakeners would struggle against it. Being in the desert was clearly the better option. As Michael noticed Mira turning her attention toward him, he calmly addressed her. I was just a little surprised by the location of the crack we're heading to. That's all, he said evenly. I thought it would be level 1 at most. Mira nodded, her expression unchanging. She didn't seem suspicious of Michael's response. Level 1 cracks are a great place to level up, but they're too weak. The space a corrupted dimensional crack can hold is small, so rather than waste time hunting monsters like goblins, even forest wolves, we could do the same in level 2 cracks. The numbers are about the same, but they provide more experience points, more money, and generally better rewards. Michael nodded at her reasoning. As long as the monster rank was low, monsters of this level could still be found in abundance. This was especially true for corrupted cracks. If Michael had access to numerous level 2 or even level 1 cracks, leveling up would be the least of his concerns for a while. Unfortunately, only the Federation and perhaps a few powerful individuals could monopolize cracks. Michael also picked up something in Myra's tone. It sounded like she, too, was in a hurry to level up. He couldn't help but feel her urgency might also have something to do with the academy. However, while he was curious, he decided it wasn't his business to ask. Are we taking transportation to carry our loot? Michael asked, shifting the conversation. Compared to Myra's motives, his thoughts were preoccupied with costs. There's no end need. I can keep it in my location in the land of origin, Lillian stammered, answering in her usual timid manner. Michael nodded in reply but couldn't ignore the thought running through his mind. TSK, am I becoming so money-hungry that I can't even afford to give basic trust anymore? Once they clarified the crack location and loot storage space, Mira moved on to provide details about the crack itself. Though level 2 creatures are technically still within the ability range of unranked awakeners, we still need to be careful, Mira explained. If I'm not mistaken, they're likely all rank 1 creatures. However, their rank can exceed common. Otherwise, it would have been classified as at least a level 3 crack instead of level 2. She paused, her gaze shifting to Michael before continuing. From the corrupted crack's name, Ape Region, it's easy to guess what kind of monsters we'll be facing. And just like the Goblin world, Mira trailed off, studying Michael's reaction. I don't know if you've been there, but it's also a forest-type terrain. Michael met her gaze, unfazed. I've been to the Goblin world. Yesterday, in fact. Oh, Mira raised an eyebrow. Then, if you don't mind, could you tell me your level? I'd like to know so we can avoid any accidents. From the way Mira directly asked the question after his reply, Michael guessed this had probably been her main intention all along. I understand, Michael said. Level 9. Michael said honestly, seeing no reason to hide his level. However, when he noticed the astonished looks of surprise on both Lillian's and Myra's faces, he realized he might have said something remarkable. So fast, one exclaimed, "S so strong." Another added. The former was from Mira, the latter from Lillian. Michael sensed that something was off in the atmosphere. To clarify, he asked about their levels. Level 7. Level 4. Surprisingly, Lillian was the most powerful one. So low. Michael wanted to blurt out, but opted to keep it to himself. Still, his expression must have given him away because Mira quickly went on to explain their situation in the land of origin. Michael could only twitch his mouth in response and choose not to comment further. It seemed he wasn't the only one dealt a bad hand when it came to his initial location. As for the girls, they were astonished at Michael's speed of growth. They knew even Brian, the so-called genius knight who had managed to awaken a dual class, was currently only at level 10. Of course, his progress was hindered by the nature of dual classes, which required double the experience to level up. Even so, on the surface, Michael's performance appeared only slightly inferior to Brian's. They didn't know what Michael had done to reach his current level so quickly, but it stirred a hint of respect for him in both of them. "What's your class?" Mira inquired. "Necromancer." Mira was momentarily stunned by his reply. Although she didn't know much about the class, the name alone suggested it wasn't a close combat specialization. Hearing about his high level had initially led her to assume he was a close combat awakener. If he was a support type and had reached this level, then his overall strength might be even greater than she'd imagined. Level 9 Necromancer Apprentice. The result matched his words, but the reality of his class made her thoughts a little depressed. Turned out the leader was the group's weakest link. Chapter 64 New Crack, 7 out of 10. Michael was not Brian, so he had no idea that Mira had just peeked at him using her skill. Even if he did know, he wouldn't care too much, as Detect wouldn't reveal anything overly sensitive about him. That said, if he were aware, he might feel a little uncomfortable, and perhaps even understand why Brian hated his eyes. From an offhand point of view, Detect seemed like the kind of skill a pervert might use to snoop into someone else's personal information. It was undeniably an unsettling skill from the perspective of the one being observed. After revealing and saying a few more things, Mira decided it was time for them to head to the crack. Even with the time difference between a crack and the real world, time was still valuable. Anything else that needed to be said could be discussed once they arrived. Michael was more than happy with this decision. The location of the level 2 crack was even closer than the level 1 Goblin World corrupted crack. At his current speed, 10 times faster than the average human, Michael could get there in seconds if he ran at full speed. This proximity made Michael suspect that the placement of the association branch was deliberate, given how close it was to the level 2 crack. A level 1 crack, even if an accident occurred, was manageable. Monsters like goblins could be resisted by ordinary people, and with supervisors as strong as Old Man Lou, the chances of a disaster were slim. Of course, casualties might still happen, but if the situation was favorable and the people in the area were prepared, the threat could be controlled. This was part of the reason humanity had survived the first wave of monsters on Aurora, because the monsters, like goblins, were relatively weak. The same couldn't be said for level 2 cracks, which were filled with rank 1 monsters. Even among rank 2 cultivators, few would willingly risk their lives entering one alone. With the association so close to such a crack, it ensured that, in the event of an emergency, the strong cultivators stationed there would be able to respond in time. They naturally opted for the obvious choice: a ride. Life wasn't a place to make unnecessarily hard decisions. The location of the level 2 crack, unlike the level 1 crack, was not a place Michael was very familiar with. However, familiarity with the area wasn't necessary to enter the crack. Unlike the Goblin World corrupted crack, which had hospitals nearby, the only notable feature of this area was the number 9 public school of Woodstone City. Judging by the school's number, it was clear that either the quantity of students was extremely high or the quality varied significantly. Schools ranked number 1 were comparable to private institutions with abundant resources, while number 9 had the largest student body but far fewer resources. Well, technically, a school is a pretty good place to harvest negative emotions. Forget the students, even the teachers are depressed. The location of the crack was even more absurd than Old Man Lou's pharmacy. It was in a hotel. Is this the positive balance for the crack? Michael thought, his expression turning odd as the idea crossed his mind. Of course, the crack wasn't within the hotel building itself, but inside the VIP mansion at the back. This was where Michael and the two girls headed immediately upon arrival. When they approached the mansion, guards at the gate stopped them. They asked to see the person in charge, and soon, a relatively old woman appeared. What followed was exactly the kind of covert behavior one would expect from a secret association. Michael couldn't help but wonder as he observed the old woman leading them toward the crack's entrance. Why are all the strong people I've met from the association so old? And why were they still working? Did the word retirement make them sick? While these thoughts ran through his head, he tuned in to what the old female supervisor was saying. Since you'll be entering the crack now, I can't show you around the mansion. However, once you're out, we offer basic amenities for your convenience. Places to bathe, food, and clothes if you don't have any. Additionally, we provide advanced benefits, like buying your corpses here instead of transporting them to the association and selling certain items. However, these options aren't as advanced as what the association's trade center can offer. The old woman continued, listing a few more features that left Michael impressed. Compared to the services near this level 2 crack, Old Man Lou's offerings seemed like they were made for poor people. Or perhaps it had something to do with the nature of cracks and the type of people who visited them. A person capable of clearing a level 2 crack was already an elite, and perhaps certain benefits came with that status. Soon, they arrived at the crack's location. Like the entrance to the corrupted Goblin World crack, this one also looked like a tear in the void. However, it was much larger, at least a whole round bigger, and the chaotic energy it emitted was far more intense. Michael didn't know what awaited him inside, but what he did know was that everything in there would translate to money for him. Okay, it's currently 11:53 a.m., and you have until 3 p.m. to be out. The time difference is 1:8, so you have a full day inside, which equals 3 hours here. I don't need to explain what happens if you exceed the time, do I? No. Thank you for leading the way, Mira, the group's assigned leader, replied. As for what would happen if they exceeded the time, the answer was simple. Someone strong from the outside world would enter the crack to drag them out. If there wasn't a good reason for the delay, like a sudden appearance of a powerful monster, they'd face punishment from the association. This was another duty of a crack supervisor, to monitor and provide assistance to those inside the crack. Chapter 65 Special Class, August 10th. When inside a crack, Michael only knew one way to open the exit, killing 1/3 of the original creatures within. 1/3 of the monsters is calculated from the moment someone first sets foot into the crack after the previous group has exited through the exit. Without meeting this requirement, it was difficult for the average supernatural to leave. According to some of the posts Michael had read on the forum about corrupted-type cracks, it wasn't uncommon for people to find themselves trapped without any way to escape. This was where the crack supervisor came into play. While the people inside the crack couldn't leave without killing the required number of monsters, this limitation didn't apply to those outside. However, once someone entered the crack, they would be considered part of the group inside. From that point onward, they would also need to kill 1/3 of the total monsters in the crack to leave, regardless of when they arrived. This was why the supervisors assigned to these cracks by the association were always individuals capable of single-handedly clearing the cracks themselves. If they lacked the strength to handle such situations, they would only endanger themselves and others. Supervisors, therefore, needed to meet a high standard of power to be entrusted with overseeing a crack. Of course, being rescued by the association from within a crack was not free. The association had a reliable way to extract value from rescued supernaturals. Because of this, most people tried to leave within the designated time if they could help it. Before entering, Michael immediately summoned his spear. The sight of the weapon in his hand surprised the two girls beside him, especially Lillian. Aren't why you a necromancer? She stammered. Yeah, is that a problem? Michael replied naturally, not finding anything odd about it. For some reason, even as a mage, he didn't feel out of place wielding a weapon like that. And nothing, Lillian said, her voice faltering. Mira, too, chose not to comment. She was the group's weakest link and didn't feel it was her place to question how the strongest member chose to fight. As the team of 3 prepared to enter the crack, the old woman in charge decided to leave them to their own devices. She walked out of the room where the crack was located, casually pointing out the button they should press to summon her once they were done. All in all, it was no different from what Old Man Lou had done for Michael. After the old woman left, Lillian also drew her weapon, a long katana that made Michael's eyes glint for a moment. Slowly, Michael was starting to appreciate weapons. Unfortunately, there was nothing particularly special about the katana itself. It was of the same grade as Michael's refined iron spear. It made sense for Lillian to use a weapon like a katana, given that her class was martial artist. Michael still clearly remembered that. He wondered about the specifics of her class and how it differed from his own, necromancer. However, the person who caught Michael's attention the most out of the 2 girls was Mira. Unlike him and Lillian, what Mira pulled out of her storage space wasn't a weapon. Instead, it was a set of bright red potions and a strap to secure them around her body. The sight puzzled Michael, and he couldn't help but entertain a few curious thoughts. Unable to contain his curiosity, he addressed Mira just as she finished strapping the last potion onto herself. "What's your class?" Michael asked. Since he had openly shared his own class with them, he figured it wouldn't be a big deal to ask in return, at least, as long as it wasn't something too personal, like whether they had a talent and, if so, what it was. Of course, he could have just used Detect on Mira, but ever since his incident with Brian, Michael had been hesitant to use the skill on humans, reserving it mostly for monsters. "Alchemist," Mira answered truthfully. There wasn't much point in hiding it, especially since she knew the method she had used to peek at Michael could just as easily be used on her. Besides, it wasn't a big deal to share. Michael was a little surprised at her class. It didn't sound like a general one. Judging by the way she carefully arranged her potions, he figured this was likely a rare one, and perhaps even a special class. Michael wanted to know more about it, but unfortunately, that would be getting into personal matters. Still, since they were teammates, he assumed she'd eventually reveal a few details. While he couldn't ask about the specifics of her class, he figured it wouldn't hurt to inquire about the potions hanging across her chest. "What are those?" Michael asked, gesturing at them. "Bombs," Mira suddenly replied, a bit too enthusiastically, while fondly patting the potions as though they weren't the explosives she had just claimed them to be. Instinctively, Michael took a step back. Even Lillian, who seemed to have some prior knowledge about Myra's potions in her class, followed suit and stepped back as well. Hey, you both don't have to worry. The bombs won't just go off the way you think they will," Mira reassured them with a smile. For some reason, her words brought no relief to either Lillian or Michael. Instead, they both took another step back. After a brief moment of thought, they each took one more step, finally feeling slightly safer. However, their unease lingered. The mischievous smile on Myra's face gave the distinct impression that she was itching to blow something up, which only heightened her teammates' nerves. "Is this a specialty of your class?" Michael couldn't help but ask. "Yes, it is. This is the red mushroom potion, your #1 choice for blowing something up." Chapter 66, Strange Talent, 9 out of 10. If someone unfamiliar with Mira saw her for the first time, their impression would likely be that she was a cold individual. In reality, however, the truth was far from how she appeared. Mira had been a problematic child who loved to fight. She never attended public school at the start, instead studying in private schools, yet her combative nature caused her to change schools every year. Her penchant for fighting made it impossible for her to stay in one place for long. Everything changed when her father died. Her mother fell into debt and depression, and her father's already small business was snatched away by relatives. In a world unlike the one before the Dark Age, owning a personal business was a rare privilege for the average person. Myra's world collapsed, and it was then she decided it was time to get serious, not just for her own sake, but for her mother's as well. Determined to take responsibility, she began suppressing the violent tendencies in her heart. In this new world, cultivators and awakeners were the most respected professionals, and Mira aspired to join their ranks. However, like most people, she lacked the talent for cultivation. While her talent was slightly better than Michael's and his cousin Lily's, they were still nothing remarkable. Accepting this reality at a young age, Mira didn't place her hopes on the slim chance of becoming an awakener. Instead, she focused on excelling in her studies, channeling her efforts into academics, and further burying her wild side. Year after year, she failed to awaken, growing calmer with each passing ceremony. That was until her third awakening ceremony when, against all odds, a panel suddenly appeared before her eyes. In that moment, the wildness she had buried deep within her heart began to resurface. Unfortunately, her awakening didn't do much to help her control it. Name: Mira George. Race: human. Class: Alchemy Apprentice. Level 1. EXP: 0/100. Strength: 1.4. Agility: 1.4. Constitution: 1.3. Intelligence: 4.8. Attribute points: 0. Skills: Crafting. Talent: Damage Maker. Unlocked formula: unlock 1 every 5 levels. Potion: Red Mushroom Potion. Gift: Mark of Origin. Mira was one of the few awakeners to possess a talent. Her talent was also quite special. If not for Brian, she wouldn't have understood what it was about. While she was suspicious of how Brian had knowledge beyond what his membership level should allow, she had no choice but to believe him after crafting the only potion she could make. As an alchemist, Mira unlocked a formula every 5 levels, and the one she awakened with was the Red Mushroom Potion, an offensive-type potion. Thanks to the mysterious nature of awakeners, the knowledge of the formula was already in her head. However, the potion's success rate depended heavily on the mastery level of her only skill, crafting, and her understanding of the formula itself, which was even more crucial. Unfortunately, while the materials for the potion were available in the real world, even the money she got from the association wasn't enough to cover the cost of a full set of ingredients. It wasn't until her return from the corrupted goblin world crack yesterday, after annihilating all the goblins there, thanks to Lillian's brutality, awakeners are ruthless, that she was finally able to afford the materials to make some. She tested the potion on the outskirts of the city, in the mountain ranges. The result? The resulting explosion and destruction reignited something within Mira. However, for Lillian, who had been invited to join Mira since she was an orphan living alone, the explosion startled her fragile heart. Explosion is art. For the wild girl, she had found her true love yesterday. Unfortunately, she was still too weak to unlock more formulas and too poor to create more of the one she had, leaving her hungry for both money and power. Though she wasn't certain, Mira believed that if she could gain admission to an academy, she'd gain access to more explosive formulas. Not only would this allow her to revel in her newfound passion, but it would also make her mother proud. After all, unlocking a new formula every 5 levels didn't guarantee another explosive one like the Red Mushroom Potion. She needed to extend her connections, and the academy was her best chance. Additionally, her talent relied on formulas like the Red Mushroom Potion. According to Brian's description of her talent, Damage Maker, you have an aptitude for highly destructive creations. Any creation related to destruction will have its effects boosted by 200%. If Michael knew about this, his eyes would have popped out. Though he wouldn't trade his own talent for anything, he would have to admit that hers was something exceptional, one that would only grow stronger over time. What would happen if she could create a nuclear-like weapon, with its destructive power qualitatively boosted by 200%? It was an incredibly powerful talent, but its drawback was equally obvious. It was a profession that burned through money. Of course, Michael knew none of this and continued to eye Mira with skepticism. It wasn't until a moment later, after using Detect on a potion she was holding, that he finally spoke. A special liquid that becomes explosive after a brief, intense vibration for 2 seconds before being thrown. Though confused by the vague description, Michael felt a bit relieved knowing the potion required deliberate action, vibration, or throwing, to explode. At least it wasn't an instant hazard. Besides, he trusted that Mira wasn't crazy enough to kill herself. Still, he wondered why she hadn't placed the potion in her storage space but chose not to comment on it. As long as you keep it on you. We've spent enough time here. Let's enter the crack. Yes, Mira replied. Okay, Lillian added. After exchanging a quick glance, the 3 of them leapt into the crack, with Mira volunteering to take the lead. A/N. Please don't read the next 3 chapters. They're all under heavy editing. Instead, wait for my next upload notification, and by then, all the chapters will be ready to read. K. Thank you for your patience and support. Starting next tomorrow, we'll also return to 3 chapters per day. Just like with the Goblin World corrupted crack, the moment Michael stepped through, his vision shifted, and in the next instant, he found himself in a completely different location. Beside him, Mira and Lillian immediately assumed defensive stances as they arrived. Teleportation within cracks was random, and teammates could occasionally find themselves separated. However, there was a trick to minimize this. Everyone had to enter the crack within 1 minute of the first person. Any delay beyond that risked teleporting to another location entirely. Currently, Michael wasn't focused on his surroundings. After ensuring there was no immediate danger, he became more aware of the air in this world. It felt different. Compared to the chaotic nature of the Goblin World, the atmosphere here was more complete, as though the world itself was more stable. The mana in the air wasn't as turbulent either, though it was still far from the real world or the land of origin. Cracks are a mystery in themselves. The time difference in the Goblin World was 10 hours inside for every 1 hour outside. Here, it's 8 hours instead, yet it feels more whole and alive, Michael thought. This realization puzzled him, sparking intrigue, but he quickly brushed it off. Now wasn't the time to get lost in thought, nor did he possess enough knowledge to truly understand these nuances. In truth, it wasn't just Michael who sensed these differences. Awakeners with even modest perception could feel the contrast between cracks, particularly when they were weak. Only those with truly dull senses would fail to notice. For now, Michael set aside the strange feeling and refocused on the task ahead. The trees here are quite huge, Mira remarked, observing her surroundings. She didn't seem to notice anything odd about the crack, but Michael couldn't be too sure. Either way, he wasn't too interested in finding out. It was time to make money. The thought had just formed in Michael's mind when 2 circles appeared beside him, and 2 undead emerged, startling the girls. Both Mira and Lillian instinctively leaped into action. "Wait, they're mine!" Michael yelled, breaking out in a cold sweat. Mira already had a red mushroom potion clutched in her hand, ready to throw, while Lillian had suddenly appeared just a meter away, katana drawn and glowing with a crimson aura that made Michael's heart race. The threat he felt from that blade was very real. Thankfully, both of them stopped just in time, one narrowly avoiding blowing up his undead and the other refraining from slicing them into pieces. "These are your summons?" Mira asked, raising an eyebrow with clear interest. She tucked the potion back with a disappointed look, as though hoping for some action. Meanwhile, Lillian quickly stepped back, almost fearfully, like she wasn't the same person about to carve something in half moments ago. "These girls are not normal." Michael groaned internally as he tried to calm himself. "Yes, they're my summons," he replied. "Only these 2. "No, just a part of them." "Figured." Mira gave a slightly complicated look as she activated Detect on the 2 undead. Her brows twitched. The first one was of a higher level than her, while the other matched her exactly. Undead Forest Wolf LV6. Undead Goblin LV4. Of course, as an Awakener. Even though her class wasn't explicitly combat-oriented, Mira was still far stronger than the 2 undead in terms of raw stats alone. However, their appearance hinted at the potential of the Necromancer class, and the realization was terrifying. Mira, though wild by nature, had spent years tempering that part of herself to focus on intelligence and achieving good grades. It had become second nature to her to seek knowledge. This habit persisted, especially after she gained access to the Super Association Forum, a treasure trove of information about the supernatural world. Compared to the ignorance of her first 18 years, she now knew much more about how her new reality operated. But the horrifying part was the potential for growth. As Michael got stronger, so would the rank of his undead. For most Awakeners, there was only one of them. For Michael, there could be dozens, no, hundreds, of powerful beings under his command. It was an intimidating concept, but Mira scoffed internally. "So what? When I get stronger, no matter how many undead he has, I'll blow them all up." She didn't feel inferior at all. In fact, her wild confidence stemmed from both her personality and her special class. Though it gave the same attribute points as general classes, Its uniqueness and versatility made it far superior to some rare classes. Mira fully believed in her own potential and future. However, this confidence also led to a common flaw among intelligent people: overthinking or over-reasoning based on existing knowledge. In this case, Mira had done the latter, evaluating Michael through the lens of common sense. She didn't realize just how wrong she was or how terrifying Michael would eventually become. For now, though, the three of them were focused on one shared goal: earning money. It was a shared problem. They were all too broke for this profession. Michael had summoned 2 undead from the netherworld to scout the area. He wasn't about to test his health bar against a creature that was likely rank 1, unlike the goblins in the previous crack, whose attacks he could shrug off. After explaining his plan to Mira and Lillian, Michael led the group away from their initial spot, using share senses with his undead to gain a better understanding of their surroundings. A few minutes later, the trio encountered their first monster in this crack, one of its native creatures. A black ape. Mira, did you check the price of a complete corpse for this monster? Michael whispered, his voice low but tinged with excitement, as they crouched behind a massive boulder. At this point, he had withdrawn his undead back to the netherworld. He occasionally peeked around its edge to observe the towering black ape just a few meters away. The creature lay sprawled on the earthy ground, deep in slumber. Yes, I did, Mira replied, her tone calm and measured despite her own alertness. A complete corpse, regardless of the ape's strength, is priced at $4,500. And how many apes do you think are in this crack? At least a few hundred, definitely more than 200. Michael quickly did the math in his head, and his breathing grew heavy as the numbers began to add up. So, we're talking about $1 million if we wipe out every single monster, yeah? Hearing his question, Mira turned to him with a sharp gaze, her wild instincts momentarily overshadowed by genuine concern. She may be wild, but she wasn't suicidal. Taking on over 200 rank 1 monsters, even with a strong team, was an idea bordering on madness. Just as she opened her mouth to dismiss any dangerous notions Michael might have been entertaining, her breath caught in her throat. Her heart clenched tightly as she noticed something emerge beside him, a shadowy, menacing figure. Undead Verdant Wolf LV-11. Rank Rare. A rare ranked undead. Myra's eyes widened as she stared at the wolf. Beside her, Michael whispered something in an almost inaudible tone, his words strange and disjointed, as if spoken in a forgotten language. She couldn't quite understand what he was saying, but amidst the whispers, Mira swore she caught a phrase like, "Evolution points, they're all evolution points." Chapter 68 Max Level. A/N. A little delay in editing the next chapters, so please don't read them yet. It'll be resolved in a few hours along with a new chapter. Sorry for the inconvenience once again. 3 chapters after reset still stands, though. Mira couldn't wrap her head around how a rank 1 creature of rare rank had suddenly appeared beside them. No, that wasn't even the real question. The real question was, how did Michael have an undead of this level in the first place? Was he cheating? Weren't they all just 3 days into being awakeners at most? Was this guy secretly skipping steps while the rest of them struggled through the basics? Was bro flying too? It wasn't that Mira didn't believe Michael could have a rank 1 undead under his control. In fact, she had suspected it when he mentioned being level 9, so close to level 10, the max level of the unranked stage. However, Mira dismissed the idea because of the little time Michael had been an awakener. But while she hadn't ruled out the possibility of him having a rank 1 undead, what she never imagined was that not only did he have one, but it was also at rare rank. She didn't know much about necromancers or how they operated, but she understood the significance of rare ranked creatures. At this level, monsters were not much different from awakeners who used attribute points. In other words, standing beside Michael now was essentially a genuine rank 1 awakener. Lillian, on the other hand, shared a similar train of thought as Mira. Michael, unaware of their distress, didn't have time to worry about them. He had never considered hiding his powers. Maybe he'd keep the specifics of his talent a secret. It felt too unique and powerful, likely linked to his transmigration, but he didn't see much issue in revealing his capabilities. For one, while obtaining a rank 1 undead might seem fast, it wasn't impossible. Awakeners grew stronger quickly. If they didn't, they'd barely be more special than cultivators. So, this shouldn't raise too many questions. As for the rank of his undead, that was the simplest question to answer. It was because of an opportunity. What else could anyone say to that? Wasn't the land of origin said to be full of opportunities? Could they force him to explain further? For these reasons, Michael saw no benefit in hiding his powers. Why would he deliberately make himself seem weaker just to avoid unsettling others? Of course, there was a limit to how much he could reveal. This was why he summoned Prince instead of Lucky. Prince's existence could be rationalized, but Lucky pushed well beyond the boundaries of common sense. Revealing it might even draw unwanted attention. Though Michael didn't actively avoid attention, he wasn't keen on it either. His cautious nature made him paranoid about the possibility of being kidnapped. By whom? He didn't know. Maybe demonic cultivators? Or someone with ulterior motives who saw value in him. They might even notice something connected to his talent and approach him with bad intentions. While the Federation was portrayed as a righteous faction, Michael, with the experience of his past life, even though short, wasn't so quick to trust that image. Unless it was an extreme cult-like organization where everyone was brainwashed from birth, all organizations had their share of different people and agendas. Because of this, Michael felt it was wise to keep part of his full power hidden as a trump card. But showing some of his strength? That was fine. Anyway, what was so special about a one-star rare-ranked creature? If given enough time, all his undead would eventually reach this stage. Another reason Michael didn't want to engage the Black Ape himself was that, while he didn't doubt his team's ability to handle it, he disliked the risks involved. A prolonged battle could also lead to unnecessary damage to the monster's body. If it was too damaged, how could he maximize his profit? Moreover, while one day inside the crack seemed like plenty of time to hunt and exit, Michael wanted more. The monsters in the crack were renewable anyway. Why settle for only killing a third of them? There was also the part with sharing the profits with his teammates. Every monster here represented potential evolution points, and it would be a sin to let them live, or worse, let them get sold by someone else. The moment Prince arrived, the Black Ape, previously resting peacefully, immediately woke up, fully alert. It couldn't be helped. Prince's presence was overwhelming, and Michael hadn't bothered to hide it. Black Ape LV, 12. Rank, Common. It was a tough monster, which was why Michael was reluctant to waste time on it. Take care of him, Prince, Michael commanded calmly. The instant the words left his mouth, a faint, violent gust of wind swept past him as Prince disappeared from his position. Prince hadn't grown significantly stronger since their last visit to the Goblin World corrupted crack. Only its skill control had clearly improved. Yet, even when moving at the same speed Lucky had shown back in the Goblin World, the generated wind wasn't nearly as intense. This had nothing to do with Lucky being weaker. Both moved at the same speed. The difference lay in the worlds themselves. This level 2 crack was clearly more stable than the level 1 crack. But Michael didn't have the time to ponder this detail. He watched as thick, robust plant vines materialized, entangling the Black Ape. Prince had used its plant control skill to completely immobilize the creature. It seemed Prince had interpreted Michael's command the same way it had back in the Goblin World, where he and Lucky had restrained goblins for Michael to kill personally. This was further reinforced by the fact that Prince, who could easily end the Black Ape with a single swipe of its claws or a bite, refrained from doing so. The command phrase had been the same, so it made sense Prince acted accordingly. Well, this works too, Michael muttered. I needed to level up anyway. With his spear in hand, he calmly walked toward the struggling Black Ape, which thrashed violently against its bindings. Seeing Michael head toward the Black Ape, Mira and Lillian stared at each other for a second before rushing after him. They were in shock. Lillian had already prepped herself for a tough battle, while Mira was ready to throw some explosives if needed. But in the blink of an eye, the monster, formidable at their current level, was so easily resolved that they couldn't accept it immediately. I'm sorry, guys, I'll be taking the kill for this one. After I level up, I'll have my undead do the same for you guys. Is that okay? Yes. Mira and Lillian replied excitedly, recovering immediately. From Michael's words, it was obvious he planned to carry them, and such luck wasn't something they'd turn down. Only Mira felt a little uncomfortable, not because of being carried, but because of the inability to set something ablaze. Still, she was smart enough to know what was better for her. At least by being carried, she could level up safely and save her bombs for another time. Mira glanced at Michael, who was intently focused on the black ape, a creature that stood a meter taller than him, with a complicated expression on her face. She wasn't sure how to feel, especially since she had been so confident a moment ago. The black ape's figure was imposing and its form was tough, but this was all useless in the face of absolute power. Knowing that the monster's thick skin was difficult to penetrate, Michael targeted the weakest spot in its body, its eye. His hands moved in a blur. With a perfect, standard posture, the spear in his hand drove directly into the black ape's left eye, piercing straight into its brain and killing it instantly. You have killed a common level 12 black ape. You killed a monster 3 levels higher than your own, earning a 4x experience multiplier. You've gained 1,592 experience points. Level up. You have leveled up to level 10. You have reached the max level of the unranked stage. Rank up to accumulate experience points again and level up. You have reached max level for Necromancer Apprentice. To rank up to Adept Necromancer and continue leveling, complete your rank advancement quest. Generating rank advancement quest. Quest generated. Advancement quest. Have 10 rank 1 Undead, 2 out of 10. Name, Michael Norman. Class, Necromancer Apprentice, max. Level, 10 max. EXP, 2000/2000 max. Strength, 7.6, 0.3 carat. Agility, 13.6, 0.5 carat. Constitution, 9.2, 0.3 carat. Intelligence, 46.3, 1.0 carat. Attribute points, 19. Skills, Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses. Talent, Infinite Evolution. Gift, Mark of Origin. Necromancer Class Advancement Route. Unranked, Necromancer Apprentice, Level 1, 10. Rank 1, Adept Necromancer, Level 11, 25. Rank 2. Rank 3. Evolution Routes. Forest Wolf. Forest Wolf, Common Rank, 1 to 3 stars. Verdant Wolf, Rare Rank, 1-star species. Redthorn Wolf, Rare Rank, 3-star species. Goblin. Goblin, Common Rank, 1-star monster. Hobgoblin, Common Rank, 3-star monster. Chapter 69 Advancement Quest and Plans. Michael felt a familiar surge of power coursing through his body as he leveled up. Yet, his focus wasn't on that sensation. It finally arrived. There was a true sense of balance in everything. An advancement quest, the equivalent of a breakthrough obstacle for cultivators, but tailored for awakeners. At the maximum level of every rank, one could not progress further without completing an advancement quest. The difficulty varied wildly, depending on one's class and luck. However, completing the quest granted immense power, pushing one closer to becoming a higher being. Fortunately for Michael, he had been hit with an easy rank advancement quest, a task that might seem daunting to others but was manageable for him. Advancement quest, have 10 rank 1 Undead, progress, 2 out of 10. This is great, Michael muttered. I was hoping I wouldn't get something that'd slow my leveling down for weeks, or worse, months. Thankfully, it's not that bad. The thought of being stuck at the same level for too long was frustrating for any awakener. Michael had read in forums that any experience points gained while at the max level of a rank were completely wasted. They wouldn't even accumulate. Right now, even if he wiped out every black ape in this crack, the effort would amount to nothing since the experience couldn't be used to level up. I already have 2 rank 1 Undead thanks to my evolution points. It only takes 6 points per rank 1 Undead, so at most, I'll be done with this in another 2 days. For any other Necromancer Apprentice, this quest would have been extremely challenging. They'd have to make 10 of their Undead reach rank 1. With each Undead requiring an average of 2,000 experience points to level up, completing this task would demand significant effort and time. Still, it wasn't the worst kind of advancement quest he could have gotten. Something like, learn 10 necromancy spells, would have been much worse. Without a strong foundation in necromancy, largely due to the short time he had spent as an awakener, Michael knew he'd have no hope of completing such a task. If that had been the case, Entering an Awakener Academy would be nothing more than a distant dream. It's also said that starting from the first advancement quest, subsequent ones might be follow-ups based on the description, Michael thought. Either way, this quest was perfect for him. It was like killing two birds with one stone, making it the best outcome he could have hoped for. For classes like Necromancer or Beast Tamer, it was commonly known that their minions shouldn't be more than 2 ranks above them. If they were, there was a significant risk of the creatures breaking free from their control, and in most cases, turning against their master. Even if Michael were to accumulate 125 evolution points, which he suspected was enough to evolve Lucky into an extraordinary rank Undead, there was a high chance it might break through to rank 2 instead of stopping at peak of rank 1. That would be a problem. Michael didn't want to face a situation where the undead he had heavily invested in turned against him, nor did he want to risk going head-to-head with an extraordinary rank creature. Thanks to his advancement quest, though, he now had even more reason to focus on his other undead. There was something fascinating about advancement quests. They didn't just signify progress, they also presented opportunities. In a sense, an advancement quest was like laying a solid foundation. Every rank advancement boosted all stats by at least 29%, with the most important stats increasing by as much as 50%. The stronger your stats were before advancing, the more powerful you became afterward. Michael figured this was one of the reasons Awakeners were encouraged to cultivate. Unfortunately, he didn't have the luxury of time. Still, there were ways to make a rank advancement more rewarding than usual. One direct method was to surpass the quest requirements, increasing its difficulty. Just because the reward for completing an advancement quest was rank advancement didn't mean there wasn't more to gain. Michael theorized that hidden and unique classes were likely so strong because their advancement quests, and the rewards from them, were on a completely different level. This also showed another reason why strength depended on the Awakeners themselves. No one knew who was who. Anyway, Michael muttered, I'm still far from reaching 10 rank 1 undead. It was said that if someone exceeded the quest requirements without advancing, the quest description would change, turning into a limited time challenge with higher rewards. Rank advancement not only brought an increase in power, but also made the Awakener gain new skills. So higher rewards than this had to be very good. Michael decided it was better to accumulate enough evolution points to complete his last 10 undead in one go after reaching the basic requirement. There were still many things to consider about his rank advancement, but for now, he had other priorities. You leveled up? Michael heard a voice beside him and turned to see Mira addressing him. Yes, I'm already at max level. That's so amazing, Lillian stammered shyly, awe evident in her tone. Does she always have to stammer? Michael wondered, briefly speculating whether Lillian was just chronically shy. Can you store the body now? He asked, directing the question to Lillian. Why yes, she replied immediately. Since there was someone else to handle the task, Michael didn't see a reason to make things harder for himself. Lillian quickly stored the gigantic body of the black ape. Michael spoke again, his tone taking on a commanding edge. Subconsciously, due to his strength, the team leader role had subtly shifted to him. We only have a day here, so let's try and make the most of it, he said with a serious expression. Internally, though, he added, and by making the most of it, I mean clearing out everything that lives in this crack. The two girls had no objections to Michael's words and followed him as they resumed their exploration. With his scouting undead leading the way, Michael quickly located the crack monsters. However, since he was already at max level and killing them would waste experience points, he stuck to his earlier plan. He let Mira and Lillian handle the kills, ensuring the two divided the experience between themselves. Before long, after eliminating several more monsters, both girls reached max level as well. This was hardly surprising. For Awakeners, experience points multiplied based on how much stronger the defeated monsters were compared to the Awakener. The crack was teeming with rank 1 monsters, which were at least 5 levels higher than even Lillian, the strongest of the two girls, who had entered the crack at level 5. Each kill practically guaranteed an instant level up. Naturally, the two reached max level in no time. Compared to Michael's calm demeanor, Mira and Lillian were overwhelmed by the rapid pace of their growth. They hadn't done much, barely anything, really, and yet, they'd grown significantly stronger. The feeling was dangerously addictive. If they weren't careful, they might find themselves unable to resist the urge to always invite Michael to be their teammate whenever they planned to enter a crack. If Michael knew their thoughts, he'd be thrilled. Why wouldn't he? More invitations meant more crack entries, and more entries meant more money to buy evolution points. He might even suggest they disband the team entirely and individually apply for crack entries, offering to lend them his undead for assistance. The association wouldn't stop them, either. It felt like exploiting a loophole, but only Awakeners could take advantage of such opportunities. Ordinary cultivators wouldn't even consider soloing a crack. There was also no rule stopping him from being a teammate to multiple teams. While Mira and Lillian wrestled with their conflicting feelings, Michael was fully satisfied with the speed of their advancement. Though he was somewhat curious about how other Awakeners fought and their methods, he wasn't particularly interested in watching them. His focus was firmly on the countless monsters he could kill in the next 24 hours. Spending his time searching for more monsters in the crack felt far more rewarding than observing others' performances. As for what rank advancement quests Mira and Lillian received, Michael couldn't care less. With Michael leading the way and his undead scouting ahead, the group spent the next few hours efficiently hunting down dozens more black apes. Name: Michael Norman. Class: Necromancer Apprentice, Max. Level: 10 Max. EXP: 2000/2000 Max. Strength: 7.6. Agility: 13.6. Constitution: 9.2. Intelligence: 46.3. Attribute points: 19. Skills: Undead Summoning, Undead Revival, Detect, Basic Shot, Share Senses, Spearmanship. Talent: Infinite Evolution. Class Skill: Contract Slot, 18/20. Gift: Mark of Origin. Advancement Quest: Have 10 Rank 1 Undead, Progress, 2 out of 10. Necromancer Class Advancement Route. Unranked: Necromancer Apprentice, Level 1, 10. Rank 1, Adept Necromancer, Level 11, 25. Rank 2. Rank 3. Chapter 70: Troubles of a Necromancer. Since the entire team had already reached max level, Michael decided to direct all the experience points to Prince. Aside from being the only truly deserving individual in his immediate vicinity, Michael had another reason. He wanted to run an experiment. Does a stronger undead lead to a more powerful form after evolution? Michael suspected this was the case, but he needed to confirm it through first-hand testing. How many corpses do we have now? Michael turned to Lillian and asked. 70, she replied. For hours had passed, and they had managed to kill this many rank 1 monsters. For most people, and even for Mira and Lillian, this was an impressive number. However, to Michael, it felt far too slow. The only thing that gave him some solace was that, despite the amount they'd killed, the portal to exit the crack had yet to appear. This meant they hadn't even killed 1/3 of the monsters yet, implying there were at least 200 in the crack. More monsters meant more money. Michael had also ensured that all the corpses were in good enough condition to fetch at least $3,000 each. If they sold all 70 for that price, the total would come to $210,000, more than double what he had earned from an entire level 1 crack. Sure, that crack had been filled with goblins, but still. This realization made Michael even more eager to hunt for more monsters. Also, the number Lillian quoted was the one that she placed in her location in the Land of Origin. Michael had a few slightly more damaged black ape corpses in his Mark of Origin for Undead Revival. He hadn't forgotten he needed 2 more undead to reach his max number of undead at level 10. After Mira and Lillian had reached max level and saw how much they stood to gain, they decided on the profit share. They proposed a 90-10 split, with Michael receiving 90%. While this might sound excessive, it made sense given that it was largely thanks to Michael that they were likely to leave the crack unscathed and alive without doing much but tagging along. However, as greedy as Michael was, he wasn't that greedy. He had, after all, taken a few monsters to himself. Michael had them revise the split, and in the end, they settled on an 80-20 division, with the 2 girls sharing the 20% of whatever profit they made. Michael couldn't have been happier with the outcome. Since everyone wanted to maximize their gains, with barely any rest, they swept through the entire crack. In the next 15 hours, the exit portal opened for the 4th time, signaling that the last monster in the crack had finally been killed. How many now, Lillian? Michael asked, placing the freshly killed black ape aside. 340, I believe, Lillian replied, a little unsure. Michael, who had been keeping rough track himself, felt it should be about that number as well. Lillian wasn't as shy around him anymore, so she didn't stammer as much, though her voice was still soft. 340, huh? If they all sell for at least $3,000, we're looking at over $1 million, Michael said excitedly. Mira and Lillian's eyes lit up as well. One thing the three of them had in common was poverty. Though Mira and Lillian were only going to split 20% of the total income, if everything sold for at least $1 million, each would walk away with at least $100,000, and for barely doing anything. This was exactly the kind of life they dreamed of. The trio wasn't the only one who benefited, though. Even Prince had its share of gains. Michael had been tracking its progress. After personally killing over 300 rank 1 monsters, Prince managed to level up 6 times, accumulating about 112,000 experience points. Now, it was at level 17, just one level behind Lucky. Michael was thrilled by its rapid growth, though he also felt a bit anxious. While it seemed like reaching rank 2 might not be too hard, the reality was very different. He noticed that starting from rank 1, every level required 50% more experience points than the previous one. Level 11 to 12, 3,500 EXP. Level 12 to 13, 5,250 EXP. Michael did a quick mental calculation. To reach level 25, the peak of rank 1, starting from level 11, would require at least 2 million EXP. The number was daunting. Worse, as a necromancer, unless he wanted to sacrifice the advantage of his class, his own progress would be even slower. Fortunately, he had evolution points from his talent to rely on. With this, his undead progressed much faster than he did. Okay, let's leave the crack. We've spent too much time here already, Michael said, a mix of excitement and fatigue in his voice. Though they hadn't fought much themselves, moving around nonstop for hours was mentally exhausting and physically draining, regardless of how high their stats were. As they made their way to the exit, Michael couldn't help but wonder just how vast cracks could really get. Maybe there's even one out there that's basically an entire world, he mused to himself. The idea didn't feel far-fetched. Perhaps the Aurora realm itself was nothing more than a crack. With nothing left to do in the crack, the team of 3 stepped through the exit portal and returned to the real world. The moment they were out, they tapped the button to summon the supervisor. The room housing the level 2 crack was much larger and more refined compared to the one Michael had seen with Old Man Lou. This place felt like a palace in comparison, almost heavenly. Michael couldn't help but wonder, if this is how the area around higher-level cracks looks, how extravagant must the ones for the truly high-level cracks be? He sat on a sturdy metal chair with Mira and Lillian, waiting for the supervisor to arrive. Despite spending nearly 20 hours in the crack, close to an entire day, it had been barely 3 hours in the real world. As he idly opened his status menu to check his talent section, Michael froze for a moment, staring at the screen in a daze. Apparently, without his noticing, his daily evolution points had already refreshed. In less than 4 hours, they would refresh again. Currently, Michael had 18 undead under his control, which, when including himself, gave him 19 evolution points daily. If he didn't contract any new undead in the next few hours, he would receive another 19 points, bringing his total to 38 evolution points. It was quite the haul. Enough, in fact, to evolve Prince into a 3-star rare rank undead, or to create at least 5 more rank 1 undead at 1-star rare rank, bringing him significantly closer to completing his advancement quest. Either choice wasn't a loss, but Michael had already decided on the latter. Currently, Prince was at level 17, and Michael feared that evolving him now might cause an immediate breakthrough to rank 2. Though he hadn't confirmed this suspicion yet, it was a risk he wasn't ready to take. Rank 2 creatures were no joke, and if he lost control over Prince, it would be a disaster. For now, it was better to focus on creating more rank 1 undead to strengthen his forces and ensure steady progress toward his quest. As several thoughts flashed through Michael's mind, the door to the crack containment space opened, and the familiar old female supervisor walked in alone. A few men in black waited at the entrance, standing silently. Michael noticed the woman frowning slightly as her gaze swept over the relatively less chaotic appearance of the crack. After a moment, her expression relaxed. Michael had a good guess about what she might be thinking, but was thankful she hadn't reacted the way Old Man Lou had. I'm too exhausted to deal with anyone trying to show off by pressuring us, Michael thought. Seems like you had a good time, the supervisor remarked, glancing at Michael and the others. Their relatively clean and unruffled appearance made them look as though they'd been on a casual, slightly dusty trip rather than a killing spree. It's modest, Mira replied, her tone neutral. Then, as if on cue, she added, You buy monster corpses here, right? The old woman nodded, gesturing for them to follow as she began to lead the way. Signaling to the men at the entrance to secure the space containing the crack, she responded to Myra's question. Yes, we do. We buy monster corpses or anything else of value that you may have brought out of the crack. What are you looking to sell? Corpses of the black apes, Mira replied simply. It must be a lot, isn't it? The old supervisor chuckled softly at the response, seeming to be in good spirits. Michael, walking slightly behind, couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. This interaction reminded him of how Brian and Old Man Lou had reacted to his crack exploits. Is there something about going on a killing spree that impresses these older supervisors? Michael wondered. Compared to the others, though, this woman hadn't mentioned anything about killing intent. Maybe she doesn't care, or maybe the team doesn't have much to begin with, he mused, considering that Prince had done most of the killing anyway. Michael soon dismissed these thoughts as the supervisor led them into an underground space. The cool, controlled atmosphere reminded Michael of the Supers Association branch. All right, let's get to business, the woman said, turning to face them with a calm but expectant expression.